Nashville, wait for it, be the healthiest city in the country. Think about that. Nashville is going to be the healthiest city in the United States of America. So here's a question for the audience, and I require audience participation, okay? How many doctors are in the audience? Because we need all the doctors to make Nashville the healthiest city, right? Is that right? That's not right. Put your hands down, doc. It's not about you today. It is about the doctors, but it's about so much more, right? So my favorite definition of health and wellness, it's not the little green pills in the amber vial. It's more than that. So the World Health Organization tells us that wellness is the presence of physical, mental, and social well-being, not merely the absence of disease. And if you think about it, in this audience right here, we have all of that. We have the doctors, we have the civic leaders, we have the business people, we have the government leaders, we have all of the pieces to put this amazing puzzle together. Now, what we need to do today, we need to finish our coffee, right? We need to roll up our sleeves, and we need to connect the dots. That's where we are. First year, we were getting everybody together. Second year, we were figuring out our plan. Today is the day for operationalizing this plan. So, as a representative of Morgan Stanley, we're really into stats and numbers and all. We're bank, from what I understand. I didn't take any business classes in medical school, but this is what Raj tells me, we're bank, so I have some stats. Part of what we're going to double down on today is growth, right? We are in a growth surge in Nashville right now, and the numbers are astounding. So between 2020 and 2024, Nashville gained over 136,000 residents. That's 6.4% increase over 4 years. Another fun stat, in 2023 alone, Nashville added 31,554 people. That's 86 more people a day coming to Nashville, right? That speaks for itself. The growth is exponential, but where there is growth, there can be stress, right? There can be stress. Do we have the housing to support these 86 new members of Nashville that are coming today? Do we have the infrastructure to get them to and fro, these 86 new Nashville residents a day? Do we have the health care for these 86 new residents a day? The child care for these 86 new residents a day? Do we have all of that to make sure that the growth in Nashville is successful? So the reason why this is so important to me is that, wait for it, not only am I a proud card-carrying member of Morgan Stanley, I am also a physician. And I know what you're thinking. What does a physician do rattling around in an investment bank all day? Like, does she go room to room and listen to people's hearts and lungs? No, I don't do that. That would be interesting, though. But what we're trying to do here is exactly what we're trying to do at Morgan Stanley. We're trying to double-click on what it means to be well. What does it mean to have wellness? What does it mean to be in the best position ever so we can be the healthiest center in Nashville? So what I'm going to do right now is we're going to call up our first panel because the growth is going to be at the center of everything. I implore you to not think that this is a passive activity today, because it's not. I know everybody is in their Sunday finest and they're sitting up and they're ready to listen. I need you to do more than listen today. I need you to participate. And specifically, my call to action for this group is to roll up your sleeves and think about what your secret power is, what your organization can do, your business can do, your practice can do to make sure we all come together and successfully support this growth, these 86 new people every day, and their families and their children. Because if we do that together, if we all think of one way our respective organizations can support Nashville during this time of growth, Nashville will not only be the healthiest city in America, you will lead the charge on showing all the other cities how to do it. So, are we ready? Participation, are we ready? Yes? All right, let's get after it.
Beautiful day. Thank everybody for coming out. I want to thank Dr. Henderson for giving a really optimistic tone about what we're doing here today. Quick preamble just about this panel and then the tone for the rest of the day is that we are going to situate some challenges, but those are just for us to be clear-eyed. There are opportunities, there are solutions, so this is a forward-thinking thought process. All of us as leaders, as members of this community, should be clear-eyed about challenges, but that's only so that we can be creative and thoughtful about how to move forward. So when you hear a challenge here today, your next thought should be listening for what one of the panelists in this panel, the second panel, or the third panel are saying, are things that they have thought of or are working through to make these things really assets for us as we go forward. Other, situating thought for the day. Imagine yourself as a shift-based worker. A lot of us being here today is because we're not, but one of the themes that we're going to talk about is if a city can work for those that actually have to punch a clock in terms of how they get to work, how they get home, it'll work for the rest of us. The pandemic taught us that our essential workers are our shift workers. To make that relevant for Nashville, our core industries, hospitality, entertainment and leisure, healthcare, all situate a shift-based workforce. If our city works well for those folks, it'll work well for the rest of us going forward. And as sophisticated as our economy gets, we still have to have that as a basis for how we move forward. So this first panel, before I introduce our esteemed panelists, is really about situating something that Dr. Henderson said if you attended this panel, this event the last year or the year before that, which is a shift worker's day or shift starts when they leave the house with their commute, and then when they leave the commute until they walk into the house. You have to add that time on the front end and the back end. Because of that, it is very important for their neighborhood, due to that time compression, to have certain assets within it so that they can thrive. Proximity is real. When you're in your home, you have a kitchen, you have a yard so that you can eat well and move well. That's your situation. But your home lives in a neighborhood. Your neighborhood also has to have those same things, proximate, available, so that the healthy choice can be an easy choice. Having said that, we're going to start with that, but I'm going to introduce our panelists. First thing we're going to talk about is where our workers live and how they thrive in those neighborhoods. And to do that, I have with me our Honorable Mayor Freddie O'Connell. I have Dr. Troy White, who is the President and CEO of the Metropolitan Development and Housing Authority. I have Joe Bucher, who is the Managing Director and Partner of Design, Visioning, and Development for Southwest Value Partners. Also a host today because we're in Nashville Yards, which is Joe's home and house, as well as some others here. And then we have Stephanie Coleman, who is the president and the CEO of the Nashville Area Chamber of Commerce. Okay, so getting started, we're gonna lean straight into the neighborhood aspect of this conversation. There's a neighborhood thought process, and then there's a house thought process. I want you to anchor on the neighborhood part of it. So, Mayor O'Connell, Nashville's growth is an asset, but all assets have to be managed. When thinking about Metro's unified housing strategy to meet housing demand in the current and future residents, why is it helpful to use a lens to develop and revitalize neighborhoods, not just houses?
Yeah, great. Thank you, Mark, and thank you everybody for joining today. And I'll give some additional context. Mark shared kind of the layers that this operates with, but once you move beyond that unit of the family, the home, the smallest organizational unit within reach is the neighborhood. And that takes a variety of forms. I mean, we think about neighborhoods in all the different ways, from urban to suburban to exurban to rural. And so whether you're thinking of a cup of sugar as arriving from right next door, or having to drive down the road to check on your neighbor's dog that's gotten loose, it's the people that you're surrounded by that are closest to you. And I've thought about it in a few different ways, because when I got back to Nashville 25 years ago, and our affordability challenges looked a lot different then because of the growth that we've heard about over the past quarter century, it was easy to find affordable places to rent in multiple neighborhoods in Nashville. But as a renter, I sometimes knew people in the multifamily communities I was in, but I didn't feel nearly as connected to neighborhoods until I became a homeowner. And I think that distinction too is meaningful about the way that your level of personal investment happens. But as soon as I was a homeowner, I had all those things that you mentioned in reach. In fact, it was a part of our choice. Again, that was a time when in Nashville very often you could look to buy a home in a neighborhood that had different things and know that it was going to be within reach. We were looking in a context where Whitney, who was now the first doctor of Nashville, was looking at med school. So we needed to be close to campus because we had a home before we actually, either one of us owned a car. And so we needed to be in a walkable neighborhood with safe bike access to campus and transit access. And that worked for a couple of years, and it let us get on our feet with an asset that continues to appreciate to this day. That's the other hard part, though. We've found a walkable neighborhood surrounded by great people, multiple incomes, lots of diversity in the community, grocery store in walking distance, library in walking distance, park in walking distance, greenway connecting us to other things, and a small business network all within walking distance. Those are the kinds of assets you want to be able to create, but today, almost 20 years later, it is harder for someone arriving new looking at that neighborhood to find that entry point of affordability. And that's what the unified housing strategy is ultimately all about. For people who don't know, earlier this spring, we received from the Housing Division at Metro Planning a collection of strategies, and we had multiple partners, Dr. White and MDHA, certainly the city, but lots of private sector developers, and communities and neighborhoods, because we know this is ultimately a conversation about more than just a unit of housing. This is about that opportunity to think about where you want to live in the city and know that you can get secure and stable housing options that have that variety of assets that you talked about that make it easy to think about nutrition, access to healthcare, access to childcare, access to jobs. And so, yes, it's about housing affordability, but ultimately between the unified housing strategy and what we learned from a big listening exercise that happened just before I took office called Imagine Nashville, there is such an emphasis on the importance of neighborhoods in the city that is the lens that we're using to think about all these things.
Thank you, Mayor, for that. And Dr. White, obviously you are a part of the Unified Housing Strategy and continue to be, but a lot of the things that Mayor talked about are part of what we would call like the built environment. Given your team's work stewarding some of the affordable communities that Mayor talked about at MDHA, what core built environment assets, walkability, safety, green space, transit, access to services, do all residents need to thrive regardless of income?
So I'm going to start by saying thank you, Mark, for inviting me. Thank you for everyone that's here. I'm also going to say I find it interesting that Mark has me after the mayor. It's always a hard pull to go after a mayor to have comments, so that always starts for me. First and foremost, all of the above. So what we've learned is you go back in the housing history that we got it wrong. And when you look at this country and you look at large cities like Nashville, we have clustered poverty, we created food deserts, we've done all that, right? Throughout the country, and you can think about Philadelphia and the Chicagos and the New York cities, the Atlantas. All of us did the same thing because that's what the game was. Then when you turn around, you realize that housing agencies like mine are the ones with the largest assets in the community. And we have a lot of land and we touch a lot of partners. And as you rethink your strategy, you start realizing you got to start with people first, right? So a neighborhood is really built for the people, and most of us don't want to ask the people what they want. We want to tell them how it should work. So at MDHA, we start with the people, and we start a process that generally takes us anywhere from 16 to 24 months. It is painful sometimes. A lot of community engagement to understand what are the real needs, not what us policy wonks think they need, but what do you really need? So as we look at our redevelopment strategies going forward in the 4 years I've been running MDHA, as we hear the people, we start realizing that we've got to do more than just the bricks and sticks, right? We can build housing, we can put up a bunch of housing, but the housing doesn't equate into great neighborhoods if you don't have services in those neighborhoods, i.e. a drugstore, i.e. a grocery store, i.e. the health care. We've got to have it accessible. As part of what we do, every one of our major transformations also has major green space. Green space is critically important. When I took this job 4 years ago, I told my former chair, Mayor Purcell, they're not making any more dirt. We got to use what we have. They're not making any more dirt. And as we redevelop these are generational changes. So I'm going to fight for low-income families to make sure we keep that moving forward, but we also got to make sure we build communities that people need. And we can't continue to just build the bricks and sticks without the service piece, without the green space, without community engagement. I will end with this. So it's all of the above on your list. I will end with this. When you think about conventional construction decades ago, and the invention of that great thing called the garage. And you get to pull up, push your garage button. If you're like me, you push the garage button 4 blocks down the street. It goes up real slow. You pull in, you push the button, you go in. Now in new subdivisions, the mailbox isn't in front of the house where you got to walk in front of the house to get the mail. You go to a clustered area. We've desensitized a lot of that. At MDHA, we're trying to bring back the neighborhood, starting with the people that we're here to serve, hearing their voice first. And when they say to us, we want greater green space, we want a grocery store, we want a drugstore, we need a health clinic, we're not tone deaf anymore. We're saying, okay, let's figure out how we do that. It's not easy, but let's figure out how we utilize the dirt to change the neighborhood into something all of us in this room would want to live in.
Dr. White, thank you for that. A lot of that, of course, is basically around the thought of the built environment. Joe, let's talk about the intentionality of that from an urban development standpoint. We sit in Nashville Yards, which is a enthralling, wonderful developmental asset for the city. Nashville Yards has redefined those amenities that center activity, community, and making a healthy choice, an easy choice in terms of right where you live. In what ways was it important that you intentionally did that in a way that it converged all here at Nashville Yards? And why was health and wellness one of the centering aspects of your design of Nashville Yards?
Thank you, Mark. I love the word intentional because, as Dr. Wright said, we think about the built environment a lot about bricks and sticks, as you put it, and about how we can just create buildings and in some way that informs maybe the outcome itself. But at Nashville Yards, we've been developing this for a decade. And although it never happens as fast as we want it to, that time gives you a chance to listen and thoughtfully integrate and think, and then also adapt and change. And then I think that's really what you see before you today as we open up the rest of the district to people to walk through and experience, because that intentionality found its way even from the beginning in a healthy living village concept, kind of a neighborhood concept. So rather than doing a development that is just purely focused on the buildings, which, believe me, are critically important, you can also think about all of the mental health aspects and the community aspects about how you really design space and how you really design urban development. The bricks and sticks stuff seems very obvious. Like we are building sustainable practices into the built environment now that is far and away better than anything we had done before. Driving down the carbon footprint of buildings through the proper selection of building materials, which we've done. You choose the right steel, you source the right materials, you do cradle to grave elements, you do things that don't kick off noxious gases into the air. All that stuff seems so obvious, but for so long we didn't do it, and now we do. We also do things like we think about how, and in our development, like how do we get more outside air into the interior spaces? Something that, maybe a great outcome that came out of COVID that we all recognize that we should be doing that we should be able to have more fresh air and, that penetrates into the interior of the spaces. And those are like built environment things that matter. And I think that there's the planning and master planning aspect that you can bring into a big development like Nashville Yards or other developments in Nashville, where there's the mental health aspect about sustainability and health and wellness. Dr. White brought up about the green space and public. We have 7 acres of open space as part of the master plan. And you're all driving up the street, you see these beautiful buildings that are in the sky, brand new stuff. You're like, wow, that's really what it's all about. And the reality is a lot of it is about the spaces between things, because that's where people occupy and about how community is made, about how neighborhood is made. So there's a mental health aspect to that. And in those open spaces, we did things like human-centric design. We think, everybody talks about pedestrian level design, and I think that the baseline idea of that would be sidewalks. Sidewalks are incredibly important. In the new MOVE plan, sidewalks are a huge piece of this. And we went from like an 8-foot sidewalk standard here to 18-foot, right? You can imagine the difference in that feel. But sidewalks are only a piece of it. Making human-centric design also means that you're not pushing everybody into a garage, or you're not pushing everybody into an elevator. When you walk into, for example, the Pinnacle Tower, and I know I saw a bunch of our Pinnacle friends here, the first thing that confronts you is a stair. You're invited to walk to places rather than exit out or go into a box and go into something else. And when you put that stuff at the forefront and you're thinking about that at the forefront and you design that in, I think it makes an incredible difference in the way that people interact with the space. And it becomes much more public and it becomes much more neighborhood-centric. The other thing is building in the health and wellness aspects to the community is in layers. Right? So you have the mental health aspect of being able to be outside and you can hear a waterfall running, or you can see fire, which are just basic human-like ideas and needs and wants. Having access to natural light everywhere you go. When you have that much open space and you think about the way that you shape the buildings so that light hits the streets. But then adding in elements like we have pickleball courts outside. which I know pickleball's like it's very trendy today, right? But the idea though is that it's active outdoor engagement, sporting courts. They become a place where people see activity and interact, and that becomes part of the actual urban environment rather than just, again, being in a box somewhere. You know, right now you can go down there and skate, and you can walk through these open spaces and enjoy all that. You can have, you know, walking paths. But then we also do that on another layer where we add in partnerships. You know, so we have Ascension St. Thomas, who has a wonderful clinic downtown. You brought up services. Having services as part of the neighborhood, as part of the development is a huge, huge deal. Having Nashville Health here to engage with the spaces, bring the community in and be able to see what we can really create together in a really wide open space. And then, you know, layer in lifestyle. You know, we need to think more intentionally about how people live. People want health clubs and they want all those retail goods and services, which we have. We also have done things like your pets and your dogs and your kids, right? Having the Goddard School on site and having dog parks in every building and elevated in the space, and it becomes part of the social fabric and becomes part of the way that we really all connect as people, as human beings, and then as a neighborhood, and creating that feel and that sense of place is really what we're focused on.
Thank you for that, Joe. And you know, when we go back to the questions we've had to this point, Stephanie, it's kind of centering a human and a person, which is great, but they all facilitate something greater from an economic standpoint. The chamber, as everyone knows, plays a critical role in job creation. And how does all of these things help facilitate and ensure that job growth is paired with community growth, so neighborhoods, particularly those that are downtown and midtown, which are really next to this shift working core, how does that, and all of this that you've heard from a neighborhood development, how do we ensure that those communities are anchors not just for humans, but for the economic vitality of the city going forward?
Thank you, Mark. So the chambers are known for job creation. They're known for economic development. And our chamber here in Nashville 35 years ago started an economic development process called Partnership. At the time it was Partnership 2000. Mayor O'Connell is one of our current co-chairs, so thank you for that. And we have Dr. Pinson, our board chair, here as well. When we look back 35 years ago, things were a little bit different. So the reason that Partnership came about is because there was actually a Wall Street Journal article that came out that said Nashville was falling behind our peer southern cities. So that would have been a time when we were comparing ourselves just in the South. Now our comparisons are much broader. But we were falling behind in economic development, and so we focused specifically on job creation. That was the core focus of Partnership. Fast forward 35 years, and the core focus of Partnership is livability. It is completely flipped. Yes, we still do job creation. Yes, we are still focusing on bringing those great job opportunities to Nashvillians and to the region. But ultimately, what drives our success as an economy is how livable we are. It's, do people want to live here? Can they live here? Can they stay here? That's what businesses are looking for when they're looking for a place to start or expand or relocate. They have to know if there's talent available. And that talent is driven not just by a job, but they are driven by what do the neighborhoods look like? What are the amenities? What's the green space? What's the health culture? What's the general culture of a community? And I think that we really benefit in Nashville right now from many visionary leaders on both the public and the private side, creating opportunities for our communities to thrive. From a place where you didn't really come here at night, unless you were coming for not a good reason, to a place that is vibrant, active, where you have businesses, you have entertainment, you have people who actually live here. That draws more of a need for grocery stores. It draws more of a need for that walkability, for dog parks, for fresh food, for community. And I think that's really what makes us so proud as a business community is that that's something that we can truly sell. Is the community that we have here is unique. The culture that we have here is unique. What sets us apart is that community and that culture. Yes, there's always more that we can do, but we've got so many great examples to point to now, Nashville Yards and others that have thought about how to build community holistically, where it integrates job opportunities with families, with neighbors, with activity, with health. So I think we're in a really unique place as a region right now.
Thank you, Stephanie, for that. And this kind of leads to, with Stephanie kind of closing that first round of questions, one of our favorite subjects in natural health, which is cross-sector collaboration. Mayor, going back to the Unified Housing Strategy, it specifically calls out that to be successful, it has to have a requirement that public, private, and nonprofit partners are all in that working together. Each of these sectors has a leader on this stage. Why is cross-sector collaboration a key to this as it relates to the Unified Housing Strategy? But beyond that, so many other goals for Metro.
Yeah, I think one of the most important parts about the strategy as a collection is that the U in Unified really is the thing that underpins the entire approach. And, you know, 3 of us here are sitting on a leadership council that was a direct recommendation of that, trying to accelerate it, look at new tools, study other markets, to Dr. White's point from earlier, reimagine some of the trends and trajectories that had existed in how we thought about delivering housing affordability over a period of a generation or more. And it matters so much because while Metro can certainly and should certainly be, as a local government, at the heart of convening, participating as a co-investor in funding, even in some cases providing land, we are not, and I would argue should not be, the principal developer, the principal supplier of capital, in many ways, not even the principal organizer of community. We know that there are, again, across all of the people sitting up here and so many of you in the audience who exist in a place where you create intentional communities, as Joe was talking about, as Dr. White, I know, is working on right now, and as Stephanie and leading the chamber through the partnership process in its most recent incarnation, thinking about livability as top of mind. It's a big deal for us to be able to collaborate. I mean, we frequently now in the mayor's office are looking at cross-sector collaboration as one of the primary approaches to getting big, important things done. We know that housing affordability, for right now, housing is the top cost for most households. The second largest cost for most households in Nashville is transportation. So as we start to look at trying to bend those cost curves for as many households as possible, we've got to do it in a way that still maintains taxpayer efficiency, that maintains a strength of partnership. And so as we've embarked on both the Unified Housing Strategy in year 1 of implementation and Choose How You Move, our expansive transit improvement program that was approved at the ballot last year, these are both massive projects that require cross-sector collaboration. The East Bank, from the recently sold scrapyard up through the Central Waterfront and Titan Stadium footprint up to River North, where Oracle's going to have their global headquarters, that's hundreds of acres of redevelopment capability that is going to absolutely be an extraordinary public-private partnership over the life of that redevelopment scenario. And that's a huge cross-sector collaboration scenario. So really the 3 biggest things we're working on as a city right now, and Unified Housing Strategy being the newest to join that collection, all of these are cross-sector collaboration scenarios.
Thank you, Mayor. And Dr. White, I want to kind of come back to you around kind of cross-sector collaboration within some of the things that you're doing at MDHA. When you think of a mixed-use development, sometimes it brings to mind like kind of a high-cost premium development. But MDHA is also employing those mixed-use concepts in some of its developments going forward. Can you speak to how MDHA is being innovative in that space including partnering with others such as Nashville Health, to center assets closer to where your residents live?
Sure. So we have completely rethought our model, right? So it's easy to build housing. But when you really look at the root of what we're doing, we can't do it alone. And I love to say that because having an earned doctorate degree, I get to say, this ain't easy. So it is very complex what we do. On the surface, it's just building housing, but we're building homes for Nashville residents. So our agency looks at it in a process of how do we partner better to get a end result for our residents that we serve. So most folks don't realize MDHA houses 30,000 Nashville residents. Keeps me up at night. I like to tell the mayor when I took this job I had hair and I didn't have gray. It is a lot, right? So part of that is how do we work with various partners and how do we collaborate? So we've got several collaborations as we look at our mixed use, mixed income model. And the model is pretty simplistic. It is based on a model from Atlanta where you put a third low income, a third of the housing units would be workforce, and a third would be market rate. What we've done is we've blended them completely within the building, so there's no set-asides. All the finishes are going to be all the same. So if we put granite, it's going to be granite in every unit, right? In terms of partnerships, to yield that, we've partnered with Nashville Health. Matthew Walker, my colleague, is in the audience. We've partnered with them to do a major food pantry at one of our sites where we just finished a Kaboom playground and in partnership with the Predators Foundation, right? And you think, why is the housing people involved with those? Because we know we've got to make sure that there is food for folks in those communities to eat where we're doing that. We also understand the importance of play space for children, right? We've got partnerships with health organizations in this city, both Vanderbilt and Meharry, that do a ton of work with us. Vanderbilt's nursing school, they do a lot of work with our residents. We have a lot of checks with them, so we have partnerships with that. I've actually got about a 20-slide deck that I go nationally and talk about all these partnerships because it's not just housing alone. We've got to connect health, transportation, food, livable locations. I want to hit on one point before I yield, which is affordability. So I've been doing this over 30 years, and what's astonishing to me, and we get funded by HUD, so they tell you what the area median income is and what this is. What's affordable to me is not affordable to the person on either side of me. And affordability is relative, right? And what I've tried to say to folks is we need housing in Nashville. We have an affordable crisis nationally, but we need housing. We can't stop the housing starts because it stresses the affordability side that I'm in. So I'm primarily in that 80% of AMI and below. We do some up to 120% of AMI, but we've got to continue to build housing, and we've got to get out of this mind frame that everything is affordable for low-income folks. No, it's what is affordable for the person that is on the shift. I want to get back to your first point. The shift worker that lives in my portfolio that walks across the bridge every day to come down to the downtown area to work at one of the hotels, or they're a sous chef in one of these restaurants. What's affordable to them is relative. So my whole thought on this is how do we break those barriers to make sure that everyone in Nashville is thriving? How do we address housing issues, which includes affordability, homelessness, and everything? And then how do we make sure all of those great spaces, as my colleague has talked about, are workable? Last point. We also are in the business of making sure our residents have access to services for job training because it's an important component of what we do. And I'll get to, hopefully at the end, to talk about our Voice Center, where we really have ramped up services in advance of a major transformational development to get residents prepared for what we believe will be the next 5 to 10 years opportunities, economic opportunities, to place them in a much better place.
Dr. White, I appreciate that answer. And in the middle of your answer, you talked about food and nutrition and the centrality of that. And across the socioeconomic spectrum, if you don't have access to food and beyond food nutrition, it's almost impossible to be physically or mentally healthy. Joe, coming to you on that particular point. Nashville Yards has plenty of dine-in options. Some of those you kind of talked about in the first round. But the Southwest Value Partners team really centered a very unique approach to the need for fresh food in the middle of downtown. Can you let us know what you implemented and why that was and continues to be important?
Yeah, thank you, Mark. So we sit in a train station here. I think that becomes very obvious, but below us was all the train tracks, and that for 150 years, that's what this kind of end of town was. So Yards is really the recapturing of those spaces, because those trains no longer really run in this area. They don't exist. So when I say the Ascension St. Thomas Landing, I do encourage everyone to potentially walk outside. I know it's a little cold today. It doesn't sound super appealing, but it will be fun. Go down the stairs and traverse back through what we call the Ascension St. Thomas Landing and under Broadway. It's really kind of found space that was originally kind of this very historically appropriate kind of thing for Nashville. Like, this is where people came to and left the city. Well, when we repurpose that space, we try to think out of the box a little bit, and how do we integrate things that we don't necessarily think of as traditional brick and mortar retail, food access, right? Everything from coffee shops or individual restaurants to something that was a little bit more approachable and different, and then also demonstrating what we can really do. So the first thing that comes to mind is we have a shipping container down there that's actually a hydroponic farm. So when you get to walk down through the landing, you're gonna be like, you'll see the Christmas tree, but look for Farm to Yards. So Farm to Yards is a hydroponic grow container that does the equivalency of about 3 acres of actual physical land space. Grows it vertically, kind of, inside of this shipping container that is about twice the size of the stage that we're sitting on here, and produces somewhere between 800 and 1,000 heads of lettuce a week. So this is not an infrastructure-heavy kind of implementation and project. And we utilize that lettuce in our hotels, and even Amazon uses a little bit of it in their commissary. But as an idea to start to integrate, kind of urban farming, locality, hyper-local things into a space, which also goes into the whole public space idea. Because when you have a park, like the landing is, and you have these opportunities to have festivals and pop-ups and things that are not traditional brick and mortar retail, it is that space between things now that can become this another level of kind of hyper-local, and then opportunity as well. So, we will hold many, many festivals that kind of sit down below us, and it gives you the opportunity to have this, local person that does the best tacos you've ever had in your life, but, they're not ready for a brick and mortar location, right? That gives them the opportunity to do so. And that hyper locality is fascinating and can really become part of the community, become part of the destination. And we need more of that. We need more of that kind of everywhere and integrated into every community, because it is possible. And you don't have to have massive infrastructure plays to be able to accomplish those kinds of things and make it super interesting and approachable.
Thank you, Joe. And Stephanie, also kind of returning to you on kind of the economic roll-up of all of these things. You touched on this a little bit, but you talked about Partnership 2030 and the fact that within that plan, among other goals, there are multiple goals to it, but it's to create over 230,000 jobs for the region. How important is what you've heard in terms of facilitating the success of that plan overall? and why is it important for us to make sure that these types of things are happening as you work toward that goal?
So I mentioned that the plan has, to some extent, shifted focus over the years. It's shifted focus from just being about projects to really centering around improving the lives of people who call Nashville home. And that's baked into everything that we think about when we think of how we do economic development. The 3 pillars of our next plan are community vitality, community mobility, and community character. And that includes some of the key issues we've just talked about. So it includes mobility. It includes how do you get around. We now have this choose how you move funding available to be really intentional, back to the word intentionality, about how we get people from place to place and provide more opportunities for them. We are now thinking about how do we expand that regionally? What does that look like to really partner across the region and build out better corridors of mobility? Also, housing, we've talked a lot about already, but I can't emphasize enough how important that is, because when we look at Nashville and the region and what makes us competitive and also what threatens our competitiveness, affordability is top of the list of what threatens our competitiveness. We are still slightly below the national average for cost of living, where if the national average is 100, we're at 99.0. And for housing specifically, we're at 100.5. Fortunately for us, that's gone down ever so slightly in the last quarter, so that's good news. But housing has been what has put most of the pressure on our local residents. If you look back all the way to 2007 to today, housing prices have gone up 150%, while wages have increased 75%. And you begin to see how families are feeling squeezed, especially those who have been here that whole time. We've also seen that cost of living number, while it's still slightly below the national average at 99, it was 91 a decade ago. So again, you see how families have been squeezed. That's why for the business community and for this new plan and for the public-private partnership that has made this plan possible, housing affordability and affordability in general is a key component. Workforce, so Dr. White mentioned that workforce and training is embedded in these communities, and that's so critical because it wouldn't do us any good to create 200,000+ jobs in the region if we don't have the workers to fill them. And I mentioned that talent is the driver of those jobs from a business standpoint, but we've got to make sure that our homegrown population has the skills and the access and the opportunity to be able to be great candidates for those jobs. And we have to work across the entire spectrum, from our youngest learners to adults who are already in the workforce, or adults who are facing barriers like childcare or the benefits cliff, whatever it may be, to make sure that we open up those opportunities and close those gaps. And then the one thing I'll mention kind of outside of those areas that makes us unique from a competitiveness standpoint is our culture. I mentioned it earlier, but I can't emphasize enough that having that creative Music City brand, when you look at Nashville compared to other areas, it really does set us apart. It really does make us unique. That plus this idea of service leadership, this idea of collaboration that you've heard throughout the conversation this morning. I look out across this room and I can name 20 or more individuals who represent organizations who we partner with on a day-to-day basis. And that's truly a part of the fabric of who we are in Middle Tennessee. But that creativity is something we can't take for granted. Our Music City brand is something we can't take for granted, because we've got to make sure we remain affordable for creatives who come here to chase a dream, or they want to stay here and chase their dream. So it's all something that we've got to be really thoughtful about. So the jobs are a piece of it. The jobs are really to provide that economic opportunity. But all of these other elements that we've been talking about, if we don't have those, we don't have the jobs.
Mayor, I'd like to thank you for that, Stephanie. It really situates that it still comes back to how a resident experiences the city in terms of how our economic vitality is facilitated by that experience. Mayor, I do want to give you a chance to kind of talk about what Stephanie talked about, the Partnership 2030, from a civic and a metro standpoint, just to see how you would kind of frame how this conversation facilitates what you think needs to happen for those goals.
Yeah, I mean, I think the partnership model, as I took office, was so consistent with things that we had campaigned on about making it as easy as possible for people to imagine staying here, whether they were arriving for a job or had been here over this past quarter century of our growth. And so we were thinking about a lot of those same things. Remarkably, they were very consistent with what the Imagine Nashville project heard in a huge community survey of tens of thousands of Nashvillians about the importance of neighborhoods, the importance of livability, and a really strong sense of belonging. And so we think a lot about how to continually reinforce that. And then we think, too, about sort of the performance of the city. I think you and Dr. Frist have also highlighted the ways in which we can't just be satisfied with the success of our growth. We've got to look at how the impact is hitting people and coming back to your notion of shift workers. And there are some things we pay a lot of attention to as a city. And so this year, as we come into December and get to the end of the year, there are some markers, basically civic KPIs that we're very attentive to. It is really good to be in a place where homicides are reaching a decade low. We're losing fewer people to violent crime. We are losing fewer people to traffic deaths, so pedestrian fatalities are down. We are losing fewer people to opioid deaths. We've recovered from a blind spot that hit us during COVID, and so we're seeing a reduction from fatalities there, thanks to expansion of the Nashville Strong Babies Initiative, which started as a handful of zip codes pilot project for 5 years. We're seeing infant and mortality deaths decline in that space because we have seen that model work so well. In fact, for the 5-year pilot period, we had a 100% maternal survival rate for participating mothers and mothers-to-be. This is a really good story. I was hearing just last night about the pilot we engaged in with Nashville Health, the Heart of Nashville program, again, a partnership with Matthew Walker, Senior Ride, Nashville Food Project, that combines all of those elements of quality health care, access to nutrition, access to transportation, and we are seeing measurable reductions in hypertension and the impact of high blood pressure. And so we're very attentive to those community level kind of signs of vitality, and we're trying to move those things in the right direction. Even as we see big things like historic gains in student performance in public schools right now, or crime being down across the board, we're not satisfied with those successes, but it's kind of great. This is a good milestone to see the needles we care about moving in the right direction. Now, how do we sustain that movement on those needles of those key indicators?
Thank you, Mayor. We've got about 10 minutes left. I don't want to give the Mayor a chance to close us out with the question that kind of rolls all of this up. But Dr. White, I do want to go back to this notion because I think it's important to touch on, because I don't think a lot of people would realize this, about MDHA, land development, being a developer. And you touched on it kind of already, but you really are a large real estate holder in the city with an eye towards developing these spaces and partnerships that make sense for your residents. How do you think land development plays into all of this, and how is your team and you looking at that element of land development around the city to center those residents?
Thank you. Real briefly, so MDHA has been in existence for 87 years, and Stephanie talked about the history. We have a storied history that always isn't told in this city, that we're the ones that oversaw the first Titan Stadium. We're the ones that did the library, the main library. We're the agency that did Music City Center. We did the Symphony Hall, Brickstone Arena. So we've had a capital D in our name, MDHA. When I got here, I said, we need a capital H. We need housing, and we need to do it. We actually rethink how we use our land, and I'll give you a quick example. So we have a lot of land around. That's why I have a lot of folks that are seemingly my friends, because we have hundreds and hundreds of acres that touch just about every area of the city. And as I sat in the job my second year, I get a call about a quarter acre of land. and we had a duplex on it. And one side of the duplex had been empty for a year and a half, and it had some structural issues. And I'm told, we've been trying to get you to sell that land for 5 to 6 years, and we want to work with you and partner. And I said, oh, and it was my new friends at Belmont University. And they said, we want to buy the land. And I said, well, they're not making land anymore, but we can do a land lease for like 99 years, and then we'll figure out, most of us won't be here, and they can figure out what they want to do. And I was asked, pointed, what do you want? I said, well, we've got to do appraisal, so we got to look at what appraised value is. But because we're mission aligned, we were able to negotiate a slight haircut on the full value, because what was more important was to operationalize that land to help the residents of 2 of our sites, our Gurnitz Studios and Edge Hill. And what we were able to come away with was a contract that allowed us for some cash for the dirt, right? So the building wasn't really worth anything, but we got cash for the 1/4 acre. But we also were able to get a 10-year agreement with Belmont University, where we now have services for our seniors. We have services from Belmont for our young residents. We've got residents that have never been to the Belmont campus that on an annual basis get to go to the campus. There are events that we do. So it's operationalizing it in a different way, in an underutilized asset. And Belmont has now put a dorm that we're trying to do for 5, 6, 7 years in its place. I now get a great relationship with the university, and our residents get access. When we put the deal together, I got a little criticism internally about, you should have asked for more money. And I said, but would a real partner do that? We can always get money. What we'll never get is the lifetime opportunity to have our residents to have access to Belmont University, their food pantry, their services, their mental health services. That's much more valuable than the one-time amount of money. So that's how we're trying to activate our land so that it works in a different way.
I think that's an important point that people don't often consider when they think about MDHA, so I'm glad that you were able to explain it and walk us through that. Okay, quickly, first Joe, and then Stephanie, if you can touch on this, it'd be great. But what metrics should city and business leaders look at to ensure development contributes to overall resident-centered thriving as opposed to just overall density? Joe, I want you to ask to say something about that first, and Stephanie, you can touch on that, and then we'll wrap with the mayor.
Yeah, I think that, if we take a step back and think about the built environment and the things that we want to really happen, you mentioned open space, right? Green space, super important. Worth stating that intentional and active open space is very healthy and very important to community. Passive open space is not. And we have to be really thoughtful about how we integrate these things into community, because we've all walked down the street and seen a landscaped area up there and went, I don't know that I want to walk by that, right? That's not the kind of things that we want to be pushing into the community and completely, pushing forward to foster going forward. And then I think the other thing too is, I'm trying to wrap up, but we have assets out there in every single neighborhood, in every single community that we need to think more thoughtfully about. And the street is the outdoor room. And we can do a better job in Nashville of cultivating that place that fosters community, which is really the street between places, and the street between homes, is the street leading to places, and is not just a place to move vehicles rapidly through the city. It is a outdoor room that all of those homes actually engage with, and has a big piece about health and wellness in a city. We have been very intentional about that, I would say, in the downtown core and at Nashville Yards. Like, if you want to see examples of that, walk through the latest developments here. Come walk through our site. Walk through the streets. You feel things that are intentional about places that people want to be and activate and entertain and just hang out in. We need to do a better job of that throughout our entire community, and it's something that already exists, and we can do a better job of it.
Thanks, Joe. Stephanie.
So I love metrics. Thank you for that question. We have a whole set of metrics that we're looking at that tie into the goals, and those metrics include a lot of what we've talked about. So we want to reduce the percentage of families who are housing cost burdened. We want to reduce commute times. We want to focus on job growth, GDP growth. We want to, one interesting nuance is instead of just focusing on population growth, we want to look at net migration because we want to better understand how many Nashvillians are choosing to stay, not just the overall growth. And interestingly, we've looked at safety as well. You know, safety is a huge part of how people feel a sense of belonging in their neighborhoods. And we want to measure not just overall crime statistics, but sense of safety or perception of safety. We also want to look at the growth of creative sectors to help us understand our impact there. So we're going to be measuring all of those things. But I do want to emphasize that what we at the Chamber measure, it really drives our strategy, but we add that to other metrics and other surveys that are being done in the community, like you had mentioned, Imagine Nashville Mayor, that really gets at that, what do people think and feel? Do they feel a sense of belonging? Do they feel like this is a place where they can envision themselves living for a long time, raising families? That's equally important to understand if we are creating an environment where people want to stay. So that it's all a part of what we look at and then what shapes how we go forward and where we put our resources and focus.
Thank you, Stephanie. And before we end with a concluding thought for Mayor O'Connell, I do want you to know that we've really been having a wellness and well-being conversation and an economic conversation at the same time. But this has really been about health overall and how it ties in and why it is a key performance indicator, not only for our economy, but for our businesses that we have here. Mayor, this is the last point, and I want to ask you this. It's specifically kind of oriented to the way you see the world from your mayoral seat. You know, some things constitute now priorities that can happen under your watch, and then there are the other things that due to term limits for mayors, you try to plant as a spark or a seed that will have to be carried out by others as an arc over time. I know from talking to you when we were outside of Boston early this summer how important it is for you to plant those seeds in terms of going forward, as well as like the now priorities that you have. So when it relates to the subject matter that we've had today, capital and community development, how do you see this in both the near term and the future term to give people kind of a vision of where you see this going?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because as I sit here today, as the Metro Council is considering our current proposed capital spending plan, which has embedded in it some East Bank investments, a planning process for a new McGavock High School, a new Antioch Elementary, and then we think about the three biggest things that we are doing as a city right now, where the city is an anchor partner, and those are Choose How You Move, which is a 15-year capital program, the East Bank, which again is going to be going, you know, if you think about how it took 25 years for the Gulch to get to what it is today, the East Bank is larger than that, and so that is going to be something that spills out across well over a decade. And then the Unified Housing Strategy is a 10-year look ahead. None of those things will be complete while I'm still in office. The things that are in the capital spending plan right now that we are positioning as investments across the city, supporting the city, a new fire station in Southeast Nashville, some of the investments we're making at the Global Mall site, because we know that Antioch is growing quickly, investments in Mill Ridge Park, the new fire station 2 and headquarters. Again, most of these projects are in the planning phases right now. They are not in the about to cut the ribbon phase, and so we're trying to make long-term strategic investments that connect up to the things we've learned from Imagine Nashville, the things that we're strategically trying to do through Partnership 2030. And one of the other things that the Chamber has done so well for such a long time, you talk about metrics, and again, bringing it back, the vital signs report that they do really is about that. It's about the metrics that cities should care about, and I think all the time, there was a recent, neighborhood gathering I was at where somebody posed a really important question that brings us really back to your opening observations about shift work, and because we're having a conversation about what things might attract somebody to move to Nashville who was already spending a lot of time here. And this is somebody who was, probably had, would have arrived here with an income above our area median income. And so now the question is, what case would I make to somebody whose income is below the area median income? And I think, generally speaking, as our office now on a weekly basis puts out an events calendar to showcase things that are really community oriented across all of our kind of parks and libraries and public spaces, things that Metro is involved in that are accessible to families in multiple parts of the city, generally for free, sometimes for very low cost. I'd make a similar case, but then the thing that we would need to address is, will they be able to find a place, to Stephanie's point, where they are not cost burdened from a housing perspective? And so I think that's, when you think about the health of the community, it's all of that comes back to, we've got to get you secure and stable housing, and then we've got to do all of the other things, cross-sector collaboration, keeping an eye on those metrics, trying to move the city to the place where everybody can thrive.
Can everybody give it up for this panel for joining us today? All right. We'll take a short break, and then we'll be back with panel number 2. Thank you all. So we're going to get started with our second panel, and I'll do a little bit of a preamble in terms of this wonderful panel as well. The title of the panel is A Workforce Shift Centering Nashville's Core Industries. If you kind of catch the flow of the day, we were talking about the things that a resident needs to have to thrive in their neighborhood before they get to work. Again, centering a shift-based worker. What do you need before you get to work? What do you need after you get to work? That is a critical part of how you spend your day. The second part of this discussion is about what happens when they get to work. So much of our lives is spent, one, at our home, and then the other piece of it is at work, and we're going to talk about those things today. We centered and talked about in the first panel that Nashville is largely cored by healthcare, hospitality, entertainment and leisure, shift-based workers. We have a sophisticated economy that continues to grow, but that is very much the core. So for this particular panel, we have leaders from each of those sectors that I just named. To my left, we have Dr. C. Wright Pinson, who is the president of the Vanderbilt Health Affiliated Network at Vanderbilt University Medical Center. He's also the current chair of the Nashville Chamber Area of Commerce. Next to him, we have Esther White, who is our host for today because she is the general manager of the Union Station here. So Esther, thank you for hosting us and having us here in this beautiful space today. And then to her left, we have Howard Greenstone, who is the founder of Red Pebbles Hospitality. I guarantee you a lot of you have actually eaten at one of his facilities. You may not know it or not, but they have a footprint that encompasses Nashville and well beyond that as well. So we'll go ahead and get started from there. So Dr. Pinson, we'll start with you first, okay? Let's situate just some of the realities of a shift-based workforce. In the first panel, we asked kind of individual questions to each of the panelists. This panel, we will ask some of the same questions to get a different lens from a healthcare standpoint, from a hospitality standpoint, about how our panelists see the world as leaders. But Dr. Pinson, starting with you about shift work realities. The Vanderbilt's healthcare teams operate around the clock. Same thing for Howard and Esther and a lot of their establishments. But what shared pressures, just to set the challenge before we talk about the solutions, what shared pressures do shift workers face from, it could be from fatigue to childcare gaps to transit challenges? How do you see that?
First of all, thank you for allowing me to participate in this conference. You mentioned that I'm chairing the Chamber of Commerce today, and I'm delighted that you are emphasizing the importance of issues for the workforce. Today, we're talking about health, but if we were having a conference over there at the Chamber of Commerce, lo and behold, we'd be talking about the same things. And so I think it's really great that you just can't get out of this room without figuring out workforce development, affordable housing at all levels, and transportation regionally are issues that we in Nashville absolutely must deal with if we want to continue our prosperity and if we want to continue to develop a healthier metropolitan area. So I loved your first panel, and I love the fact that you put this forward, because all of us need to understand how important working on those three things are. So anyway, back to the question at hand. The idea of working shifts, especially those people who end up working the night shift, it takes a really heavy toll on their physical health. The interruption of the circadian rhythm is just not good for you. And people don't get enough sleep. The sleep they get is not very good sleep. There's very good evidence that it leads to obesity, heart disease, diabetes, certain gastrointestinal issues, and then there are the whole mental health issues. And anxiety, depression, they're definitely at higher levels for people who do shift work, especially who work at night. So we need to recognize in healthcare, it's a pretty heavy load. I mean, there's a lot that is going on for healthcare workers, especially those people who are working at night, which are people who are in hospitals dealing with urgent issues. They are facing difficult situations. They are helping patients who are not at their very best, and they face a lot of violence. They face a lot of families that are hostile. It is tough work to begin with. And then if you're doing it at night and not getting enough sleep, it is very stressful. I would also add that it impacts the quality of the work that people do, because if you're under stress and you are not well rested and you are facing all of those issues that I just described, it's a huge problem. I will tell you that child care, which is a major issue, is even worse for those people who have shift work, because they're not trying to get child care at the same time every day, Monday through Friday. They're trying to get it at night, and it's oftentimes not available at all. And if it is, it's at a very high cost. The transportation challenges that I mentioned a minute ago, for those people who are doing shift work, it's an even bigger problem at night than it is. And I might add that going back and forth to work at night carries more risk, walking around in parking lots and so on late at night or very early in the morning. So those are some of the issues that I think our shift workers face.
It's a really good level setting. Dr. Pinson is talking from an experience from a healthcare leader of a large healthcare system, but a lot of those same pressures are evident when you go downtown and you have a meal and people are either taking care of you in your hotel or taking care of you even as you're served a meal. Esther, I want to come to one point that Dr. Pinson came to around transportation. We recently gained you as a wonderful asset from Chicago, and you've been in Nashville about a year and a half. I know from talking to you that you believe Nashville is an amazing place and will continue to be. And so the question, even though it situates something that could be a challenge, is really around how we can learn from that and position opportunities out of it. How would you contrast the presence of you doing a very similar job in Chicago with a functional mass transit system with what cues Nashville can take from that for the benefit of its shift-based workers going forward?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here. We're so happy to be your hosts, too, so I just wanted to say that at the beginning, too. And as the newest member from everyone that's on the panel to the person in Nashville, it was such a warm welcome that I felt. Now, when it comes to transportation, I will say that it is a little bit different, and I was so excited to hear about the Choose How You Move movement that is happening and the focus on that, because it's so fundamentally important for getting our employees, but also guests that come to the city. International travelers really look to make sure that they use mass transit as well. But to Doctor's point, our shift-based employees, they don't work on a normal schedule. Sometimes they're going to get here early in the morning before everyone wakes up because they're the first person that you're going to see to greet. They're going to get the breakfast ready, get the day going. But they're also the last person at night. And so right now, some of the aspects that are missing from that transient is having more options and more fundamental ways to move around. In Chicago, you had the CTA train, you had bus routes, you had bike lanes. So there were several different options for shift-based employees to be able to move around the city easily and affordably. Here, unfortunately, it's not as much. When our employees come in, our organization is fortunate to be able to take care of their parking charges for them to make sure that they can come to work without any problems. But not every organization is able to do that, and some of those expenses to be able to even park, let alone get here, and the transit time can really impact them at home and their families.
Thank you for that. And that leads right as a great segue into the question for Howard. Howard, you've got shift-based employees, not just in here in Nashville, but in a lot of other places. So you're perfectly, positioned to answer this question. How can employers ensure that shift workers who often can't make daytime appointments still get preventive, mental, acute care? What are some innovative things that your organization is implementing or plans to implement in order to meet that variable?
Well, thank you very much for having me, and I have to say that, I am involved with 40 or 50 or so restaurants, small restaurants, as opposed to large restaurants, which means a smaller employee base. And I will say that there's the theoretical and the actual reality of having shift-based employees. Unfortunately, I'd also like to mention that this is an invisible workforce today as opposed to years ago. A lot of them, frankly, have to hide. A lot of them can't get the care. Even if we do a lot of different things to assist our employees, a lot of them, they do have the time because not everybody works during the day and they have variable shifts, but their ability to understand where to go, how to have that access. 10%, I would say, of our workforce, which is over 2,000 employees, have actual healthcare coverage. And so for the other 90%, what we're trying to do is find ways to educate them on where to go. I had an unfortunate situation yesterday where I had an employee who needed a certain medicine, $65 a month, couldn't afford it. Our restaurant industry is squeezed by everybody all the time. So it isn't a financial thing for us. We literally cannot afford to pay more for that individual who needed this medicine. I personally paid out of my pocket because we as a company don't have the funds, if you will, because you're being squeezed everywhere. So in return, what we can offer and try to do is create a relationship that is based on trust and guidance and support for our employees, as opposed to a lot of other industries which have the margins to be able to actually financially put money there. So what we'll do is we're trying to educate our management team on where to go, if an employee is sick or they need help, where they can go to get that assistance, as opposed to us being able to financially help them.
Howard, that also is a great segue into a question for Dr. Pinson, and Dr. Pinson will be kind of a two-part question. The first is kind of talking about the challenge, and then the second is about what you guys are doing to meet it in the hopes that others in the audience can learn from that. But hospitals and service industries, and I can kind of talk to the audience on this, we've all been somewhere recently that essentially has a sign that says, be kind to our people so they can treat you, or so they can serve you. That's a relatively new development in terms of seeing those types of signs where you go in the last 5 to 6 years. In an environment where you have to have that posted, Dr. Pinson, in order to make sure that your teams can serve others well, how important is it to create a strong sense of support within your teams internally, and how have you and your organization done so?
We have faced over the past few years, I would say through the COVID era and all of the vaccination issue around that, we have faced a great deal of hostility from our patients and from the families of our patients that comes as a great surprise and disappointment to people who deliver health care. That created a great deal of moral injury, a great deal of stress for people who feel like they are knocking themselves out to help other people to come under threat and to be physically accosted. I mean, you'd be surprised how many physical incidents occur in a hospital every day. So I will just tell you, the mental stress that healthcare workers are under is really tremendous and has increased a great deal since the COVID era. Everybody in the room read all about how much stress we were under when we were loaded up with all of the patients who had COVID, and everybody has heard all about the workforce issues in healthcare, especially nurses, but it's a lot of other specialty positions like surgical technicians and laboratory technicians and radiology technicians, and the shortages that we faced. We absolutely have to pay attention to the mental welfare of our workforce. We spend a lot of time thinking about these issues, and we've passed policies as a result of these issues that I've just described. We've passed policies saying we will not tolerate harassment of our employees. We will not tolerate it. And we let patients know, we will ask you to leave. And we let families know, we will ask you to leave. And so we've made it very clear that that's our policy, and we've made it very clear that we will enforce that policy. And that has become quite important, I think, to the well-being of our workforce, that they know that we've got their back. But in a more general fashion, I would just tell you that burnout in many industries is much like what I described. It's on the rise. It's a big problem. And I would describe this as twofold. You have to have awareness and support from the top of the organization around workforce wellness. And secondly, you have to develop programs that actually deliver that workforce wellness. We have an employee wellness program at Vanderbilt University Medical Center that's been in existence for many decades. Maybe between 25 and 30 years ago, we developed a program that was focused specifically on frontline physicians and nurse practitioners. You would be amazed at how busy that employee wellness program is, and you would be amazed at how many physicians and nurse practitioners. 25% come in for help every year. 25% of our workforce. Now, you would think with those kinds of numbers that this would be extremely well established in healthcare. But the fact of the matter is, less than 30% of hospitals have a wellness program, which to me is just amazing. given what I've described about what it's like to work in healthcare these days. But I'll go back to my statement. It's very important that leaders understand the importance of wellness and the stresses that our workers are under, and it's very important that we develop programs. We have a chief wellness officer, and we have wellness champions in every department. I'll go on to say that I think at a personal level, it's important to recognize that there are a lot of people today who are suffering a great deal because of the socio-political environment that we're in. And the part of the workforce that is suffering the most is the one that's invisible. And we all have a responsibility to try to make the environment for those people at work better. And what that means is we need to devote more time and attention to personal relationships. People say, well, you know, you can't possibly be friends with all of your employees. And I say, you absolutely must be friends with your employees. You have to take care of your employees like they're your friends. That you need to make them your friends. You need to have a true personal interest, and it needs to be demonstrated. And it's not only at the top of the organization. The top of the organization must send the message down that you expect every manager to develop those kinds of relationships with their employees. You may not like what's going on in the environment, or you may like it, but one thing you can do is you can influence the environment inside your place of employment. You can make it better for your employees by developing these relationships, as well as supporting these wellness programs.
Dr. Pinson, that's a great word in and of itself around controlling the environment that you are part of and controlling the controllables. I think if we send that message internally, there are always the business KPIs of recruiting and retention, but you'd rather be better at the latter so you don't have to spend as much time on the first, which is continual recruitment and continual training. That leads me to a question that I'm going to pose to Esther and then to Howard. It's really the same question. We are in an environment, a socioeconomic environment, to Dr. Pinson's point, where we're facing rising housing and transportation costs that push our teams further out from the city. How does the cost of living plus the commute equation shape your workforce stability and retention and recruitment, and why is it so important to retain a workforce in the middle of those dynamics?
You know, in the hotel business and within the Marriott family, one of the things that is instilled that Mr. Marriott passed down to leaders is that if you take care of your employees, they'll take care of the guests, and everything else will take care of itself. And I think that is kind of part of the culture that really comes in within hotels and hospitality overall. My focus as a leader is really to take care of my employees and listen to their requests and their needs. And sometimes with the ever-changing atmosphere that's happening in the ever-growing parts of the city, we have to be able to help shift and mold and change to help them be successful to truly take care of the guests in-house. So sometimes with shift-based workers, you do have flexibility to be able to help them start their day a little bit earlier or possibly come in a little bit later to help them with some of the struggles of transient life coming in and out of the city. But that's not always the case. So making sure that we're doing what we can to help our teams be successful in order for them to stay and be a part of our team and be stabilized. It's very important because with consistency of product and being able to make sure that every time a guest comes in this hotel, they are getting the same level of service that they expect, having turnover of staff would not be able to do that. So it's really important for us to take care of our associates, give them the fundamental values that they need to be able to continue on.
Thank you, Esther and Howard.
Hello. So I've been in the restaurant industry for a very long time, and I lived in Manhattan for 25 years, or I worked in Manhattan for over 25 years. At one point, I commuted from northern New Jersey into Manhattan, and it could take me anywhere from an hour to 3 hours to get to work. I was lucky because I could drive. There weren't trains where there wasn't public transportation, but the hourly employee had to do the same. Things haven't changed that much over the years as cities like Nashville grow and the hourly employee has to move further and further away. The challenge to get to work is stressful, and then when you get to work, the mental anxiety of having to take care of a guest and create guest satisfaction, if you will, creates its own challenges, which can affect people physically as well as mentally. And as Dr. Pinson said, the relationships that we have to create are what we can offer to the employees. The days where our shift workers or shift employees or people are going to believe in the quote-unquote company mission in a lot of ways are long gone. What they care about, and rightly so, is themselves and their family and their children and what they can do for themselves. The challenge is, as I said before, about the invisible employee is further compounded, obviously, because of our political and socioeconomic environment that we live in right now. People are afraid to come to work, and when they do, they're afraid what's going to happen when they leave work. Everything we as an employer can do to help that is going to make life easier for them. I will say, as for the city of Nashville, anything that we can do as that employee gets pushed further out is more than anything is empathy, understanding, and listen. And that's something that we try to do every day.
Okay, and we'll continue with kind of this round of asking you all kind of the same question and getting a different viewpoint because of your industry orientations and what you lead. So in answering this question, your answer can be actual or it could be aspirational or a combination of both. It could be about things that are actually happening or things that you would like to see happen. When it comes to supporting working families, and Dr. Pinson, we'll start with you, what innovations or partnerships could support child care that aligns with non-traditional work hours?
Child care is a tough one. It's a tough one for everybody. But there are employee-sponsored programs that have been very effective. There have been community-based solutions. There have been private-public partnerships that have been put together where costs are shared between the employer, the state, and the employee. The notion of developing nearby dedicated child care centers is an important one. And so I'll just say there's a lot of different ways to solve this problem, but I'll also say it's a very tough one.
Esther.
I would say childcare is probably the one that is a struggle the most for those in hospitality and shift-based. And part of the reason why is not just the cost of it, but it truly comes down to the times and availability. One thing that is wonderful about the hospitality business is the fact that a lot of times it's family-based, family-run. But even in the hotels, we have lots of families that work here, and you'll have multiple layers within those families. And I think that continued culture of being able to have one person work in the AM, one person work in the PM, and there's that kind of ships passing in the night, that handoff from the family values at home continues to be something that we see. And it's just because there's not as many resources truly out there and available in an affordable aspect for most families coming up and starting out in hotel business or hospitality as a whole.
Thank you, Esther and Howard.
I think it's interesting, having been asked to be part of a panel and really focus in on health has sort of made me and our team reconsider what options that we can provide to our employee base. You know, you have a small little restaurant with 30 employees, you can't provide childcare, but what we can do and we will do is point our employees in the right direction. Again, I have to keep going back to the fact that the restaurant business, you know, the hotel business and the restaurant business, while we share a lot of the same hospitality ethos, don't have the same margins. And so a small little pizza restaurant that has those 30 employees has to find creative ways, but meaningful ways to help our employees. And so I truly am motivated based on this seminar to put together, you know, a one-pager for all of our employees to be able to go find the resources that they need.
And Howard, since we're in this round of asking the same question, I'm actually going to stay with you and we'll kind of work our way back. You know, all of you lead organizations where performance is directly tied to employee well-being. Howard, you made that point several times already. But how do you assess the ROI, the return of investment, of investing in worker health, stability, and retention? That could be quantitative, it could be qualitative, but how do you see and assess the return of doing things such as what you just said?
I'll start by saying that never in my career have I seen quiet quitting or you know, just ghosting, which is the favorite term. The turnover rate in restaurants is unprecedented at the moment for a variety of reasons. Better opportunity. My restaurants are not on Broadway, which hurts me because, you know, if a job opens up, they just, you know, an employee won't show up. As Dr. Pinson said, creating the relationships amongst our employees and providing access. It's not a financial thing for us because we can't do it, but showing that we care, investing and listening to our employees, which hope creates a meaningful relationship, will reduce the turnover. And turnover is the killer in our industry because everybody wants to go into a restaurant or a hotel or any service-like-minded facility and find the same smiling face over and over again because that creates comfort and familiarity. We unfortunately can't kick, you know, our guests out of the restaurant if they're unruly, and so we have to figure out how to ensure that employee and team member wants to come back. And truly, the turnover is the thing that we want to try to eliminate. That ROI is not, you know, in the training and retraining. It's in, you know, top line growth. And so if we can keep our staff happy or engaged, which is incredibly difficult these days, then we've won because they won't want to leave.
Esther, how are you assessing the ROI? That same question from Howard.
I think it's twofold. I think it comes into being accessible, just like Howard said, making sure that you're around, and Dr. Pinsky said as well too, it's being available and being a part of your team. If I come in every day and when I start my day, I do my rounds, I touch every department, I touch every aspect of the hotel and come through. And once you get to know your people and you see, if you come in and you say, good morning, you'll be able to see a shift, and you know your team. If you say, hello, good morning, and they say hello back, or if they say, hi, you can tell from the body language that something else is going on. And then being able to dive in and find out what is weighing on them and ways to help to be able to build. If they are distracted by something at home or something that is going to, that level of service is not going to come forth to our guests, or the expectation that's going to come out, the product isn't going to be there. So it's so important for us to invest in them to also see the product that comes forth. And the turnover, it's very similar within all aspects of hospitality with it. And that turnover is a killer. And I think if we continue to create the culture to be able to make sure that people feel heard and seen, and do whatever you can, even little things like just saying thank you. Those invisible employees, a thank you goes a long way when they are taught to walk around tables and be around the people that they take care of the most and not be seen. So from the back end, it's so important to be able to say thank you and celebrate wins with them. We have monthly associate luncheons that we do with our team, and be able to give recognition that for the people that go above and beyond every single day to take care of the guests here. And that's the way that we try and return the investment in our associates, the way that it comes forth through the hotel.
Dr. Pinson.
We worry about turnover, as I've described, and anything that we can do to reduce turnover by supporting employees is really crucial. Reducing absenteeism is another important point. I mean, every time somebody calls in sick, somebody else has to be called in from home, and that may be an overtime or some other more expensive situation. We also feel like we reduce our own health care costs on our employee basis by dealing with these mental health issues. And so, well, then I'll add to that, there are definitely productivity gains. I mean, the better state your employees are in, the better the productivity. And as their engagement and morale improves, you made it very clear that your employees, how they feel like they're doing impacts how your customers feel. Well, that's really true in healthcare. I mean, you're asking people to take care of other people. And so the state of the healthcare worker's mindset absolutely influences the product that we produce. And that ultimately impacts our reputation. So when I think about the returns that we get, it is reducing our turnover, it's reducing our absenteeism, it's reducing our healthcare costs, it's improving our productivity, and it's improving the quality of the product that we deliver. What does that cost? Well, I told you we have a whole team, a chief wellness officer, and many healthcare champions in every department. We have a program that we staff. A quick back of the envelope calculation says the ROI on that is 30 or 50% or 75%. I mean, it's huge. I mean, in healthcare anyway, and I suspect when I listen to you all talk, the situation is so similar. I think any amount of time and energy you spend on the wellness of your employees, you're going to get a great ROI on.
Dr. Pinson, that touches on something you said before. We'll stay with you. Some of the statistics that exist nationally that kind of talk about the situation that you framed around how tough it is for healthcare workers in this environment. There was a Reuters report, or Reuters reported on a report, a survey that indicated that more than half of the current healthcare workforce nationally has intentions to enter a different industry. Against that backdrop, it's of prime importance to talk about the mental and do something about the mental well-being of your team. But the scale of healthcare can actually offer some insights to some of the other operations in terms of how we deal with that. What are some of the lessons that you would want to share against that backdrop, given that healthcare has the largest scale represented on this stage?
Yeah, well, we are talking about 20% of the economy. That's one thing. I guess what I would tell you is this issue of paying attention to the experience that your employees have in life is really crucial. And I've tried to make the case it's more crucial in the last 5 years than it's ever been. And when I listen to you talk, and I think about the high turnover that you describe, it makes me want to mention that the place where you really need to pay a lot of attention is younger people and newer people. And they are also the people who end up with the shift work that has been the focus today. Young, new, single employees are lonely. They need our attention. And so I would just say the experience that I've had is that any amount of time and energy devoted to workforce wellness has been crucial to the success of our business.
Dr. Pinson, thank you for that. It's a great lesson around we still have to center wellness even in an economic context. Howard, I want to come to you. Thus far, even the way we frame the conversation has almost been kind of an inside-out framing from Nashville, even from the standpoint of a healthcare, hospitality, restaurants, because that's what people think of when they think of Nashville. The traditional Nashville experience that we're known for is powered by these teams. But Red Pebbles, the company that you run, has launched staples of Nashville cuisine. You named some of them, but your footprint is way bigger than Nashville. You don't just operate in Nashville. So to give an external framing to some of the issues that we're talking about today, how would you rate Nashville's ability to field a thriving workforce in your industry versus other cities that are in your footprint? And if there is a gap, what do we need to do to catch up? Yes. From a competitive standpoint, do you find the landscape for workforce teams easier to navigate in some of your other footprints? Do you feel like Nashville has an advantage or a disadvantage in that regard?
Well, so I operate restaurants in 10 to 15 states, I believe. Some in urban area, major urban areas like New York City. A lot of your ability to be able to field or to retain or to hire employees will be based solely, more than anything, on your ability to get there and your transportation. And I would say that Nashville is probably is one of the more difficult places let me back up. It depends on where your restaurant is located as to how easy it is to access. We have restaurants anywhere from 12 South to the Gulch. Some places you can get to, but you can't park. Other places you can park, but it's going to be very expensive. Our other cities that have a much better public transportation system are going to make it easier for employees to get to work. I will say that the first restaurant that I owned or opened here was Adele's, and we're now 12 years ago. Easy back then, right? Lots of parking, not a lot of skyscrapers next to us. Now, incredibly difficult. It's very hard for employees to. Now, employees can get to work, but they're going to have to pay. And again, this isn't woe is the restaurant industry, but it is a little bit woe is the restaurant industry, because there's only so much when your margins are so slim as it is that the employer, it isn't a question of whether we want to pay for parking for our employees or pay for access. We would do anything to have our team members, A, get to work, show up consistently, which Dr. Pinson said, absenteeism is an issue. I think absenteeism leads to ghostism, where they just disappear because it's just too hard to get to work. I would say that Nashville is average to below average based on our accessibility for employees to get there. New York City, for instance, may sound difficult. It's probably the easiest place because of subways and buses and the connection between all the boroughs. And no matter how far out you are in, one of the metro areas, for instance, in Manhattan, you can find a subway or a bus to get there. I don't think the same is the case here.
And we will cap with this question, and Howard will stay with you and then work our way back, and Dr. Pinson will have you to give the concluding answer. But let's talk about a transformational fix. Let's kind of imagine hypothetically that we can create something now that doesn't exist today, but could exist in the future. So if Nashville could solve one major challenge tomorrow, housing, transportation, childcare, healthcare access, could be something altogether different than what I just named. Howard, from your perspective, what would most benefit the shift workers you lead?
That's interesting. Can I say all the above? It would be all the above, but since that's not so I was thinking as I was listening to everybody's responses and the questions that there is the theoretical and the actual. And I think what we can solve is addressing the actual, right? We can all sit here and talk about how we can do all of these wonderful things, but the reality is physically we can't, wave a magic wand and have public transportation to get our, dealing with the theoretical challenges and providing information to our employees as to how to navigate the challenges that they have and educating them and candidly holding their hand and saying, we don't just want you to come to work, we want to guide you on all of the challenges that are important to you. As I said before, trying to build, your core values in your company and building your company strategy, in a lot of ways, those are the things of the past because of all the other challenges that we know an hourly employee has to deal with. So what we can do, what we here could do more than anything is provide a roadmap and then educate that employee on that roadmap.
Esther, and Howard, thank you for that. Esther, if there was something that you could address today that would benefit your teams, what would that be?
To Howard's answer, I would say D, all of the above for sure. But I think when you think about the big picture and transportation, as I heard the first panel and the growth that continues to happen and we see all over the city, without that base infrastructure for transportation and for our teams to get around, they're not going to be able to get the wellness that they need, to get the care that they need. They're not going to be able to have their kids walk to school on the sidewalk the way they need to safely. They're not going to be able to get to and from work and might have to seek other employment because parking could be too expensive or the transit time is too long. It takes them away from home. I think transportation is the one that can be focused on to see better results faster as the city continues to grow over everything that's coming in the next 10, 15 years.
And before handing off to Dr. Pinson, I do want to say that we are going to basically summarize some of the themes about solutions and advocacy and push those out so that you can have those, because we want everyone to feel like coming out of this, they can actually have a meaningful way to either implement some of these things, or if they don't exist, advocate for some of those things. So I really appreciate you all for situating it in that way. And Dr. Pinson, I'll give the floor to you for the concluding answer on if there's something that you could change now, what would that be going forward to come out of this particular panel?
Mark, I'm going to be like a broken record. I opened this up by saying it was a great conference because everybody in the room couldn't get out of here without understanding how important developing regional transportation on top of the Choose How You Move here inside Davidson County. You couldn't get out of here without understanding the issue of affordable and attainable housing at multiple levels. And you couldn't get out of here without understanding dealing with workforce issues. And so I'm saying you got to pay attention to all three of those things. They're all crucial. The only other comment I'll make is that we've talked about how tough this is, or at least I have. And one thing I want to be clear is, we have worked at this. We've worked at trying to make a environment that is healthier and more supportive, and we've been very successful. When I said a minute ago, the return off of this is huge. What I mean is our business has continued to be very successful. That the turnover that we've had is actually reduced in the past 3 or 4 years since COVID. The amount of agency work that we've had to have has dropped to practically nil at this point compared to huge amounts that were required in the middle of COVID. And I would say that the morale of our workforce, because we do an engagement survey every year, the morale of our workforce, we can document, is very good. And I would say that people in large part are very proud of their work and very happy with their work and feel like they are making great contributions. So I just want to say, although this is a tough topic, when you work at it, you can be very successful.
That is a great tenet to end on. Can we give a hand for this great panel? We will now take a networking break, and the next voice you hear will be that of Senator Frist introducing a wonderful panel to headline and close us out. And you also hear from Dr. Henderson. I'm sorry, I actually messed it up. Dr. Henderson, you're next to come up, but we are going to take a break after Dr. Henderson comes up, and we can adjourn the panel, but thank you.
All right. So did we disappoint? No, I told you it was going to be an amazing panel. And I am very acutely aware that I am standing between you and your break. So this will be extremely brief. First, I want to thank the first two panels for their amazing content. As a recovering emergency medicine physician myself, I appreciate all of those comments. The burnout is real. The return on investment is real, and that's why we are all sitting in this room. So thank you so much to the previous panelists. Before we head into our break, we want to take the opportunity to thank our partners, without which we would not be here today. So I'm going to take just a few minutes to call out our event underwriters, and I'm going to start with a fellow Morgan Stanley partner. I'm going to call out the Packnick Group. Raj, thank you so much. I can't see you right now, but I know you're here. There you go, Raj, for being the co-creator of this amazing event 3 years ago, and he has championed it every year since then. So big hand for Raj. I also want to call out Carrie Mack and Nashville Yards, who came on board as co-underwriters of this year's event. So thank you, Carrie and Nashville Yards. Both Raj and Carrie are members of the Nashville Health Governing Board and visionaries whose positive impact will be felt in this city every day. Our event sponsors also need a little bit of love. So I want to say thank you to Detweiler Foundation. Thank you for Centerview Partners, Ascension St. Thomas, WellPoint, Frist Cressy Ventures, Tennessee Hospital Association, and Pinnacle Financial Partners. Thank you so much for bringing us together to do this amazing work. We are well on our way to Nashville being the healthiest city in the country. So I want you to take your break, meet somebody new, come up with a strategy to move us even closer, and do not be a minute late coming back, because you're not going to want to miss any of our all-star closing keynote panel. So we'll see you at 10:45.
All righty. First of all, congratulations to the first two panels. It is really remarkable in terms of how much you can learn just by listening. And do want to thank Union Station for configuring the way we are today. First of all, I'm Bill Frist and started Nashville Health about 10 years ago. Put together an idea for Nashville Health, because we really haven't talked about it this morning, so 1 minute. The vision for Nashville Health was that health is more than health care. That health involves exactly what the conversation has been about today. It's the non-medical determinants integrated with the medical determinants, the doctors and the hospitals and the systems, but it's predominantly the non-medical determinants that determine well-being, productivity, fulfillment, happiness, contentment. As a city, compared to other comparative cities that we're competing for business and growth, it was apparent to me and a group of people 10 years ago that we were not where we wanted to be using data, objective measures. And we started with the obvious ones, things like infant mortality. that we're not as good as other cities. But why? We have the energy, we have the resources. How long people are expected to live here? We're not as good as other comparable cities. That's where it started, and over this period of time, it's evolved to a room just like this, that is comfortable. Our presentation today will be like being in someone's living room and a conversation about somebody doing what Nashville Health does best, and that is bringing together people, convening people, but that's not enough. We need the collaboration, the conversations over the last 15 minutes, the conversation that we'll have here. That's not enough. The third thing we do is coordinate. We give focus and alignment and the coordination of the convening and the collaboration and the coordination. And then fourth, the most important thing is the action, the collective impact that we take away. And we have no idea what that actually is, but the best way to share that information is to have conversations. The conversation that we'll undertake now is pretty interesting in that you see three figures who have spent most of their adult lives in service in some way to Nashville, to Middle Tennessee, to the state, to the region, to the country, and the world. This is the first time that the three of us have ever been together and done anything like this, A, and then B, it is totally unrehearsed. And so it is like being in your living room, so we have no idea where we're going to end up 55 minutes. We have never all three been together. We have at dinners and that sort of thing, but had a conversation like this. And you are about to be exposed to and this is the embarrassing part, but not really, almost 250 years of experience. Add it up, it's about that, it's not quite there, but it's close. We can't argue the numbers. And the experience really doesn't matter, but everything that we've talked about today is built on a foundation. And the obligation of all of us in the room today is not to build necessarily on that foundation, because you are already doing that, but in some ways it is your responsibility to build that next foundation so that 30 or 40 years from now people can have a similar conversation pointing back to you, to us. Pretty interesting concept, because most of us think every sort of what's going to happen tomorrow, a year, or 2 years. But right now, what we'd like to do is complete the trajectory that we've been talking about. Most of this morning has been on today. We'll drop back a little bit and talk about why is Nashville hip? Why can somebody bring 40 restaurants to Nashville? Why can we have a facility like this, which is gorgeous, that has been almost like adaptive reuse? Why can a development like the development that we're in the yards, be successful today? And you're going to hear a little bit of that, not taking credit for any of it, but a little bit about what's come before to continue the trajectory so that it might continue in the future. And the health and well-being is such that still our infant mortality is worse than other cities. How long people will live in Middle Tennessee is worse than other cities. Smoking, more people smoking in Middle Tennessee than our other cities. Other cities, I'm talking about Charlotte, Austin, a whole range of cities, Fort Worth, Texas. Why are we not doing as well as they are today? And that's the call to action. With that, 240 years of experience. I'm not going to say anything about myself, but Governor Lamar Alexander grew up in Maryville, Tennessee, served 2 terms as governor, later as U.S. Secretary of Education, president of the University of Tennessee, and then 3 terms in the United States Senate. He played a central role in education reform in each of those capacities, recruited major employers like Nissan and others to Middle Tennessee with this global perspective, bringing it to Nashville itself, and has been one of the country's leading champions for, and this is close to me, as you all know, conservation, the outdoors, the closeness to nature, and the intersection of the planetary health, the health of the soil, the environment, and pollution, and how it impacts our individual health and well-being, and mental health and spiritual health coming forward. The Great American Outdoors Act we'll probably touch upon. He's been an unbelievable voice that people don't see as much that I got to see because we worked together in Washington around the most creative aspect of Nashville, and that is the music industry and songwriters in Nashville, Tennessee. You don't see that very much, but he was on the forefront in establishing both the guardrails and making it possible for the types of creativity that is in Nashville. Governor Phil Bredesen, I have to be really careful, but has probably done more than any other policy or government official, elected official, in accomplishing what we're seeing right here within 200, 300, 400 yards of where I'm sitting. And I say that, again, sort of unabashedly, but it's the impact he has had in his vision, his execution, his implementation of what goes on in downtown Nashville today. And again, we'll touch upon some of those things. And I say that because I just went and saw the Beatles exhibition next door, and that Frist, which, you know, it's sort of nice, the Frist Art Center, it would not exist today if it weren't for the governor sitting, and the mayor at the time sitting next to me, and his vision of looking ahead. And we know the NFL will touch upon that. We know the parks and the greenways. Most of you know something about that, but when we talk about the 7 acres around here of green space, or we hear from the housing standpoint that green space is important, much of that originated with Governor Bredesen next to me. In the healthcare world, that's where his origin began. Healthcare world is the largest sector here in Nashville, Tennessee, both in terms of job creation. We've talked a lot about that. Much of our thematic around Nashville Health comes back to healthcare and well-being, and again, that's what brought him to Nashville, and we'll talk a little bit about that. I don't know in truth we'll talk about all that. I'm Bill Frist. I'm a heart and lung transplant surgeon. Joined the world that they were a part of in terms of public policy and healthcare, public policy and government. 12 years in the United States Senate. For the last 18 years have been kind of doing exactly what you see here today. So let's start, and Phil, just because you were sort of the mayor itself, when you first started, what was Nashville like? Let's take people back, and feel free to add anything. Again, this is a conversation, and those are the sort of things I'd like to touch upon over the next 50 minutes, but why don't we start with that one?
I think I became mayor in 1991. It was for 8 years, and I think back to Nashville at that beginning time. I think of it as being a little schizophrenic. I mean, on one hand, there was an aspect of it which was an old southern city and very genteel, a lot of old established families. On the other hand, there was a kind of a very energetic sector that I think arose out of, in part, Vanderbilt, with a number of people that it brought in from around the country. The 2 big HBCUs here brought in a lot of people from other parts of the country, and I think it was kind of at a crossroads. Are we going to be more like Birmingham or more like Pittsburgh or Philadelphia? And I very much wanted to be part of that transition because I really believe that I grew up in a very rural environment, but then lived in Boston and London and other places. But I really think that having a place where people can come together, where you get a very heterogeneous groups of people who might not ordinarily be together otherwise, is a part of the joy and the value of living in a more urban environment. And it seemed to be something that Nashville was kind of lacking, that the social life here was more built around having a barbecue at your house rather than going to a hockey game or whatever. And I think with the help of a lot of people over the last 30 years, the city has very much changed in that regard.
And we'll talk about the change itself, but Nashville was a very, very different place. Lamar, how would you take it sort of the early days here, because it was a very different city than the vibrancy and the energy and the challenges that we have that we outlined earlier as well?
First, Bill gave himself a poor introduction. I mean, he was one of the leading heart-lung transplant surgeons when he ran for the Senate. He became the majority leader, created PEPFAR, and is now chairman of the Global Nature Conservancy. Maybe you all didn't know all that, but I wanted to thank him for this. Let me go back a little earlier than Phil mentioned. and give you a picture, tell you a couple of stories about what Nashville was like. I came in 1970, and my wife was invited to go to the Centennial Club for lunch, which is a number of Nashville ladies meet 2 or 3 times a week. And she was introduced to one of the women from Belle Meade, who looked at her and said, "Welcome, honey." She said, "Now who were you?" And of course she wasn't anybody. She was from Texas and from out of town. At that time, the older families of Nashville had a dominant position in the city, although it wasn't too dominant, because people like me and my wife and others, Phil, who came to town, could find plenty of ways to get ahead. Another thing about Nashville, Phil said schizophrenic, there was a little bit of lack of confidence. In 1985, when Saturn had decided to come here after every state wanted it, we hosted in the governor's residence the Saturn executives with some Nashville residents. And as they were leaving, one of the Nashville ladies said to me, "Oh, Governor, I'm so embarrassed." I had after dinner music performed by Charlie McCoy, who was a harmonica player. She said, "Why did you have that harmonica player?" She said, "What will those people from Michigan think of us? Why didn't you offer them Chopin?" And I said, "Why should I offer them average Chopin when we've got the best harmonica player in the world?" There are a lot of Nashvillians who are uncomfortable with Music City, which was a brand that almost every Chamber of Commerce in the world would die for. Other things about Nashville in the 70s where it was dirty, the air was dirty, couldn't breathe very easily because of mainly coal-burning plants and exhausts. There was no auto industry in Tennessee. The Ford Glass plant was the only auto parts supplier. Compare that with today, where Nashville is the center of auto manufacturing, and there are 1,000 auto suppliers in Tennessee. And there was really no healthcare private industry then. HCA had just started, but all of the rest of it had not. But it was a pleasant place to live. It was a lot smaller, and there was a group of business leaders who met privately, headed by Pat Wilson, whose goal in life was to keep Nashville from growing so much that it became Atlanta. So that was the mood in the 70s when I moved here.
Phil, build on that a little bit, because it does come back to what we started with, and that was a while ago, and then we had this vision. And when you came into government and the policy, did you have a vision of where Nashville should be or where it could be? And was that vision as clear as, I mean, in retrospect, looking back, look at it. I mean, it's exploding, it's exciting. But talk to us a little bit about that, of early days and vision.
Yeah. Well, I'd like to tell you that I came into the office of mayor with this very clear notion of exactly what I was going to do, but that would be inaccurate. I knew that I think that any city to be successful has to have a vibrant downtown where people can come and be together. I certainly knew that I wanted to do something about that. I mean, if you know what it's like now, if you had come down to Lower Broad on Friday evening at 6 o'clock in 1991, you would not want to tell your relatives or your wife that you were down there. I mean, it was a very rough, tough place. And the way that I went through actually several iterations of trying to make that work. The first thing was looking at trying to bring retail back down again. That was just not going to work for a bunch of reasons. I actually went to the University of Tennessee and talked to them about would they be interested in putting a campus downtown, because was looking for some anchors that would bring people down there. They were not interested, and finally just had this moment of just saying, well, wait a minute, this is Music City. Entertainment and really building on that music image gives you a unique selling proposition that you can use to build the city. As a way of getting that jump started, built the arena, which is now certainly known for sports like the Predators, but at its outset was really designed to be a venue that could be used for concerts and the like. I mean, in Music City, USA, if you wanted to have a concert with a large audience, you had to go to Murfreesboro to do it. And it's been very, very successful. It was a rocky road. When I was first starting that, we did a poll about how many people thought we should have. It was a 10-cent property tax increase to build an arena downtown, and fully 17% of the people of Nashville thought it was a good idea. Today, today there are quarters now in which that arena is the most booked arena in the world. And so it's I think, really a testament to the way that people have taken that starting point and built around it, to make, I think, what is now a very successful downtown. Some cracks. I have no responsibility for the pedal taverns. That's not my fault. I think we've had a good run. One thing I wanted to say to a group of young people like this is, we have had a good run for 30 years, maybe, in doing this. It really is time to start rethinking that next 30 years, which you kind of alluded to, and I think it's part of the purpose of this group. What's Nashville 2.0 look like? I think in the business world, if things are going well and you put your feet up on the desk and light up a cigar and tell yourself how smart you are and how things are going, that's usually the point you can look back on, is when it all started to go over the top and down the backside. And I think we're right at that point now, and I think we've got a mayor who I think is capable of doing it, to really start thinking about, okay, what does the next 30 years look like? What are the different directions? What are the new things we need to be doing to build on, I think, the success we've had?
Lamar, talk to us a little bit about Japan, because Nashville was a very small provincial town. I was born here and have really had the opportunity to be in this train station when it was a train station, and be in the post office next door, which is now the First Art Museum, when it was a real post office. And on every April 15th, when I was 10, 12, 13 years old, we'd go down. Everybody would be there to mail their tax return, and so have been able to see that growth. But the global perspective, I think you really kind of introduced it to Middle Tennessee, to Tennessee broadly, with what went on in active recruitment of a Japanese automobile industry. Where did that come from?
Well, it came. I can tell you where it didn't come from. I walked across Tennessee in 1978 to be governor. It took me 6 months, and I stayed with 73 families, and I guarantee you not one person said, as soon as you're elected, I sure hope you go to Japan and try to recruit some jobs here. But in 1979, which was my first year as governor, mortgage rates were up at about 18.4%. Inflation was 12 or 13. Unemployment was 10%. And Tennessee was the third poorest state in terms of family incomes. And we had no auto industry. So I go to my first White House dinner, and President Carter says, governors, go to Japan and persuade them to make here what they sell here. So off I went. And Nissan and other Japanese manufacturers were just beginning to think about manufacturing in the United States. They had been manufacturing in Japan and just selling everything here. And they were very tentative about the United States. Every state east of the Mississippi wanted Nissan, but the long and short of it was it came here. Why? One, cars were invented in the Midwest, which is the center of the market, and it's a good place for them to be because if you're shipping lots of heavy things, cars and trucks, transportation costs are less if you're in the center of the population. The center of the population had moved over the last 80 years down toward Kentucky and Tennessee. That's one. Two, no state north of Tennessee had a right to work law, which meant no UAW. And UAW was a source, along with the car companies themselves, of the lack of competitiveness of the American automobile industry at that time. So Nissan looked for a central location, a different labor environment, and a warm welcome. They came, then Saturn came, and pretty soon a lot of companies moved toward the south, and the real challenge was, where are the suppliers going to go? Because that's where most of the jobs, and that's another story. But that was how Japan came to Tennessee. And it couldn't have been two more different places, but we did a lot with Saturday schools and even published a book done by the Pulitzer Prize winning photographer named Robin Hood that showed the similarities between Nashville and Tokyo and Japan and Tennessee, because the latitude is the same. So their irises bloom when ours do, and the maples turn colors when ours do, and they could feel at home here in the environment, which Bill likes to talk about.
You know, that was, I never had seen that book. Robin Hood is not somebody, any of you know, this is different Robin Hood, this is a real Robin Hood. And I just saw that book for the first time, not at your cabin, somebody, I guess he gave it to me. But it made me realize how important marketing really is. So Lamar, you were governor, you were what, 35, 36? How old were you when you were governor?
I tried when I was 33, but I didn't. I was like Bredesen. The people didn't see the wisdom of electing me the first time. 38.
So 38 years of old, but had the vision of putting a book together and going and convincing the Japanese that Nashville was the place. The marketing end of that, and today it is done through social media, but how do we portray ourselves broadly? It made me think of that. But I think I mentioned that because advanced manufacturing would not exist really clearly the way it is today if it weren't for somebody at a pretty young age sort of looking at this perspective and then acting on it, not just looking at it, and bringing that to the state. And then today we know in terms of the economy itself. And Phil, as governor, built so much on that. Phil, let's come back a little bit and bring it back to right where we're sitting. The cultural aspects, I mentioned Lamar and the songwriting and the creative aspects, which I saw that the creative, whether it's the listing rooms around Nashville or the songwriters are here, it's still where in the world people come. It is people like Lamar, and then Marcia Blackburn has built on, others have built on it coming in, and I did some of that while I was there. On the creative side, Nashville did not have a culture. It was not a New York or even a Los Angeles or San Francisco. We didn't have the cultural anchor. And so here we sit, and within 100 yards of us is a adaptive reuse of an iconic place that has gone everywhere except one city in the world, of an iconic building when we think of preservation, because a lot of us don't think preservation is that important. Or not a lot of us don't think it's important. A lot of us don't value it as much as taking down a building and putting something else up. And we've never really talked about it. But now we have a museum that people, when I'm going to get into an Uber, people don't say, oh, you're former Majority Leader of the United States Senate, did PEPFAR and HIV/AIDS around the world. They don't. They say, oh, your name is the same where I took my kids for a museum to see art that I never had the opportunity to see. So this cultural anchor, right where we are, where did that come from? And it's a marriage of public and private partnership. But you and I have never talked about it, so how did that come about?
Yeah, it was, one of the differences that I found when I got in public office and became mayor in 1991, between that and the business world that I was out of, was it seemed to me that if there was an extra dollar in the public sector, the tendency was to sort of spread it all over the place. Let's hire some more firefighters, let's hire some more police officers, let's do this. And I was used in the business world to money being more accumulated and being used for large investments, capital investments that made a difference. And one of the things I wanted to do was just change that a little bit. So as the city grew, we were also, I called it civic furniture, that we were also investing in some of these things that I thought would help make us competitive for young people with, the Austins Jacksonville's and Denver's and those kinds of places. And some of them were built around sports, obviously the Predators and the Titans. Some around more cultural things, and the museum was one of them. It was when I was mayor. Your brother came to see me about trying to get it done over there, and the city, I thought it was a great idea, and the city became a partner in that process. He had originally suggested back that the foundation that they had would upgrade the building, and so on, and the city would support it over time. And I suggested to him we probably should do just the opposite. That the last thing you wanted to do was to have the success of the organization be dependent on what the council was doing every year, or what exhibition they got mad about being in there, and so on. And we did it so the city did the renovations of the building, and then the museum took it over. And I think it's been a great cultural success in the city.
It has, and it was. I think it was really a lot of cultural involvement and attempts, but it really became sort of iconic, and it became it because of a vision that somebody who really, actually, my brother didn't really appreciate art fully, but he knew to be a modern city with a foundation of growth and creativity to complement Music City, that it needed to be there. So he wasn't from that field. Our whole family can't sing songs very well, and we can't play instruments and appreciate art. But then it couldn't become a reality without the partnership. And when the mayor this morning said that the role of metropolitan government is not to come in and fund everything, to run everything, to convene everything, we've got to be partners. It made me think of that partnership, which was at the time public, private partnership built around culture, to give a cultural anchor to Nashville in many ways, and then to capture the creativity that comes out of that spurs the imagination of other people. And then the preservation of taking a building, an iconic building. I mentioned there's only one other. All the others have been torn down. When you go in there, you can't help but to feel of the 1930s and the iconic architecture that is there and how it marries, and it does inspire all of us. But it's the public-private partnerships, these ideas coming from different people working hand in hand with policymakers, making it happen. The one thing we haven't talked about today very much, and because we can't talk about everything, is education. And yesterday morning, we introduced from SCORE, State Collaborative on Reform of Education. We started 17 years ago, the community did, and it has had a huge impact, but we probably wouldn't have started in terms of K through 12 education. I encourage everybody to look at that report. When we started it, we were probably, in those years, we're probably 47th, in terms of K through 12 education, and now we're up to about 50 percentile instead of being at the very, very bottom. But that started pretty much with Phil building a little bit on what Lamar had done before. So Lamar, why don't we start with you a little bit on education, because most people are not aware, when you were governor, what you did in terms of teachers. At the end of the day, it is the teacher. If you look at all determinants for K through 12 education, there are a million of them, but to have an impactful teacher at the head of the class is the most important thing. We talked about it yesterday at SCORE. And Lamar, why don't you just share that story?
Well, the first thing I'd like to suggest to those of you who are relatively new here is that when Phil talks about education after I do, you'll notice he's a Democrat, I'm a Republican. We had about 40 or 50 years here where we had a back and forth. We had a very competitive two-party system that drew into elective politics, or serving for someone who had been elected, talented people like you, who would come in, and like Bill and like Phil, who would come in for a while and then go back out and start another business or do something else. And I mean, talented people like to be in a competitive system for the same reason athletes like to play in the Southeastern Conference. They like to play against the best. So we got some really good people, and the end result was when they got elected, they did a pretty good job of governing. Now, starting with education, here's how we focused on it. I mentioned we were the third poorest state, right, in family income. So my first instinct was to recruit jobs. Then I invited a fellow named John Nesbitt, who had written a book called Megatrends in the early 1980s. And he was saying how the economy was changing from high touch to high tech, et cetera, and that you need great colleges and universities. And out of that, my takeaway was I can recruit all the auto companies I want to, but most, maybe 8 or 10% of jobs in a churning economy disappear every year. So we're going to have a lot more jobs than we can recruit. We're going to have to grow our own. So what does growing our own mean? Well, part of it is having a nice place to live. Bill was talking about the museums and Dollywood and East Tennessee and Graceland and the Orpheum Theater in Chattanooga and other places. Nice place to live. But if you're going to grow your own jobs, you've got to have skills. So better schools meant better jobs. And so I worked with the Democratic leaders of the legislature, and we had a better schools program. And we became the first state to pay teachers more for teaching well, created summer academies, of which there are now 12, called Governor's Schools for talented high school seniors. Thousands have gone to those. Created 100 chairs of excellence at universities where the state put in $500,000, then we raised another $500,000. They'd be $2 million chairs today, and a number of other things. But the bottom line of that was it put a higher value on education, which leads to Governor Bredesen, Governor McWhorter, and those who came next, Governor Haslam, because they took that increased value on education and did a number of other things to multiply it. So that we've made a lot of progress in our colleges, universities, and in our schools. One of the greatest being Governor Bredesen's realization that we were thinking we were better than we were. And so he insisted that we have accurate readings of achievement levels, and that spurred another level of accomplishment.
All right, so this foundational, every governor wants to be an education governor. The actuation of it is what's unusual here coming through. So Phil, why don't you pick up? Because this is the time that we were starting SCORE, and it wouldn't have been started if it hadn't been your truth in advertising. Take it from there.
I think, when you have a job like governor, you're pulled in a million directions, all the time, and it's sometimes a little hard to sort through what's critical and what's not. The epiphany for me, I think, in education came from the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, who did a report on basically truth in advertising, as Lamar said, and gave Tennessee an F on it. And the rationale for that was that when our students took at the end of 8th grade their test on things like math proficiency, we were telling 80 or 85% of them that they were proficient in mathematics. When they took the national test on that, they were getting 19 and 20% proficient. Now, you can explain 10 points as being normal variation, but that clearly meant that our tests were a lot easier than they probably should be. So what I found with that is, in politics, you always have to navigate conservatives and liberals, and people have different views of things. But what I found with that was that the idea of saying, well, let's start out by being honest with parents and students about exactly what's going on was something that people would get behind from all parts, who may have very different ideas about how to go about implementing things. But the idea of truth in advertising and telling people honestly turned out to be one that was widely shared across the political spectrum. And so that was the direction we went, and it started out really turned into the standards movement, where if you think about education as really being about the teachers, which it is, and it really is a problem in human capital management, I think. The idea of managing someone without telling them clearly what it was you wanted them to do. What does it mean to finish 4th grade in Tennessee? seemed wrong, and so we went down the road of trying to establish very clear standards and high standards and get them in. We were at the end of that time, we'd gone from one of these 47th or 48th to we were rated second in the country behind Massachusetts for the quality of the standards we had. And I have to say that my successor, Bill Haslam, going back to a Republican again, I think did a fabulous job of sort of taking that foundation and then continuing to build on it and build it out in his own way. And that's the way you get things done. I mean, if you're sloshing back and forth between, here's one governor who wants to do things one way and another governor says, no, everything the previous one did is wrong and I'm going to do it this way, you never get anything done. You just flop back and forth. But when you have a succession, where you've got 8 or 16 or 24 years of people moving in their own way toward a common goal, that's when things really happen. And I think Tennessee's been very fortunate to have a string of people in public office who have had a commitment to that view of the world.
Bill, could I give an example of that, because it involves all three of us? When Nissan moved its headquarters from Los Angeles to here, and about half the employees in Nissan's headquarters in Los Angeles quit rather than come to a place like Tennessee. I mean, that's the difference. Today, they all want to come, but then they didn't. But at that time, the governor was named Don Sundquist, who had defeated Phil for governor. Phil had just been elected governor, if I'm remembering this right. And Bill was the majority leader of the Senate. And so the Republican governor brought Redison, his successor, to meet with Bill and me in Washington with Carlos Ghosn, who was the head of Nissan then. And that conveyed to him, as it did to lots of other business executives, Tennessee has a stability of leadership across parties over a period of time, both federal and state. That made a big difference.
Yeah, that's an important point, I think, particularly in the environment that we have today. That sense of continuity is really important. During my term as governor, we recruited Volkswagen to come to Chattanooga. And that was a difficult recruitment. I mean, 4 weeks before the announcement of that, it was not going to Tennessee. But one of the seminal things was Bob Corker, who was a senator at the time, and had an event at his home for the people, and I was there and you were there. And we sat around, and afterwards, one of the executives told me that one of the most impressive things that really convinced them was you had these people who were from different parties and very different backgrounds, and they obviously were friends and got along and willing to work together. And that while things like incentives were important, particularly getting through the kind of first cut on places you go, in the end, what they're looking for is just an environment that's got some stability and you can live in and you understand that it's not going to be flopping around from one strategy to another all the time. And I think that's often underestimated in terms of what businesses are looking for when they make investments and make relocations. That stability and that understanding how decisions are made, and that is really vitally important.
Yeah, I think this kind of opened things spontaneously here, talking about Nashville Health, that basically we want to convene, and then we want to collaborate, we want to intersect, and then we want to take that and coordinate to begin to target, taking everybody's best strengths and minimizing their weaknesses. And that's still not enough, because you want to have the collective impact that is measurable and using data. And that's Nashville Health. That's what we do. We do all four things. Nobody else in Middle Tennessee is doing it around well-being and health and healthcare, because that's our purpose. Other people have purposes and apply pieces of that. And this kind of translates a little bit to that. If you look at where education and the flow of education, and education obviously we increasingly realize is what economic development is all about. And even as we think about K through 12 education, it comes today very much not just about being educated, but how that trajectory comes to economic stability later in life and a career that will actually take you there. So we have to rethink education. But it takes that kind of collaboration, and collaboration means, doesn't matter if it's Democrat or Republican. Again, we contrast this to where we are globally at the national level today. And we have to be very careful at the state level today. But if we want to do great things that have the measurable impact, it takes that kind of true collaboration, and that builds on the themes of the partnerships and collaboration that Mark did in the two previous panels before us coming in. And it's measurable. We were at the bottom of the pack. We're not at the top yet, but we went from 47th to 45th to 40th to 35th to 25th to probably 23rd in the country. That's measurable impact. All the other states and cities are trying to do the same thing. We are the one that went like that. But it takes that sort of building on these foundations, passing the baton, forget the parties. And it's not just at the governor level, and it's not just at the city level. It really comes down to our organizations and communities and rooms, just living rooms just like this as we go forward. Shift gears once again, because I'm thinking of these dimensions that make Nashville attractive today, that took somebody's vision. And you mentioned it quickly, because these were not popular issues early on. When you did the arena stuff and the tax stuff, I mean, these were not popular. And what you did with the TennCare and having to look at health care itself, it was not popular coming in. There were battles. Now we look back upon them as great achievements, and I want to celebrate that, but it's important that none of this stuff is easy. Each of these programs that you've done, let's switch to another one. Right now, athletics, we're seeing a lot at Vanderbilt now, but really a lot of this started with your focus on bringing sports teams here. Where did it come from? And it's kind of a no-brainer, I guess, today, looking, but at the time, was it or was it not?
No, at the time, it was, I think, considered impossible for Major League Pro Sports. In fact, I remember when we first got the arena passed and were building it, I was out giving a talk somewhere and talked about, we're setting it up so with suites and stuff so we can be attractive to a pro sports team. I thought probably it would be basketball at the time. It turned out to be hockey, and people were just saying that is totally ridiculous. There was an op-ed published, I think it was in the Tennessean, about if that guy thinks we're ever going to have a major league sports team here, he probably is smoking some of that stuff still that he probably saw in college or something like that. And I think it was just a measure of how far the city came, that by the time I left, we had two of them there, and people were mad at me for not having a baseball team, here yet. But I looked at that as one of those things. I talked about civic furniture. I don't think anybody's going to come to Nashville because the Predators are here. But when you got these young professional people who, in this day and age can live and work where they want in the country, and we're competing with cities, like Austin, like Denver and Dallas and Jacksonville and Charlotte and all those places, it's one of those amenities that adds something in the positive column for when you take a look at that. And I think from that standpoint, it's been successful. It's given the city just kind of put you on a slightly different plateau than the cities who don't have those kinds of things. It was a very unusual thing for me because I'm not particularly a sports fan. In fact, when we worked to recruit the NFL team here, now the Titans, it was then the Houston Oilers, I had never been to a football game in my life. It kind of helped, I think, in terms of selling it in the city because people knew that. And they were saying, well, I don't know if he's right or wrong about this, but at least I think it's not that he's having some ego trip about, he's going to recruit it and go down and put a play in or something at some point, that he must at least think it's something that's got other values for the city. And I think they've turned out well.
I think it's really important for us to share. And it's not humility, really, but I mentioned my brother Tommy, who didn't really care that much about art, really, but he had this vision that it's really, really important in life. It's just, and then you basically say, football just wasn't a big deal, yet you ended up having the vision and then the mechanics to make it happen. And to me, it's really encouraging because it means whoever we are, if we're open to it, if we come to conversations like we had today, it'll stimulate and inspire ideas that you can't just sit back and say, oh, that's a good idea. I kind of like that. It was fun to listen to. But that, yes, each of us can go out and do something outside of our space it becomes pretty magical overall. So to me, that's where these kind of gatherings are really inspirational.
Bill, I think that's a really important point for people because, for every 100 really good ideas out there, there's one or two of them that actually become real, and it's because somebody is willing to roll their sleeves up and do the work to take a good idea and turn it into reality. And I think one of the strengths of Tennessee and certainly Nashville has been just an unusual number of people who are willing to do that. But good ideas by themselves are not worth anything. It takes people who are willing to move them forward. I think this room is full of exactly the kind of people who are going to do that in the years ahead.
Yeah, and I'll just add, it means taking risk, but that's where the collaboration comes in and the partnership, because you build the ecosystems around you to minimize that risk coming in. But it does mean taking risk, but you don't take them alone, and that's where collaboration is important. Healthcare, we won't spend a lot of time on healthcare, but I want to do two things, Lamar, just so you'll start thinking about it, because it's another good example of that. You are not necessarily focused on health care because you were doing so many other different things. But all of a sudden you became probably the most important person in terms of genetics, cellular therapy, gene therapy in the United States of America in terms of setting policy. So start thinking about that as we come through, as I waste a little time, because I want you to tell me a story of how you got involved with that and what you did, because nobody will know that story in here. Healthcare is interesting in terms of the healthcare part of it, not the health part of it. And I think a lot about it with the Nashville Healthcare Council. Nashville is now an ecosystem that everybody, whether you're in the investing business, the clinical business, the administrative business, is coming to Nashville now over the last 5 years with meetings and coming here to fill the hotels, to have conventions here. It goes hand in hand with that. That is because about 25 years ago, a group of healthcare people, and healthcare wasn't always big here. We've had great academic places. We've had Marion, we've had Vanderbilt. But in terms of really getting out as being an ecosystem, a cluster, that's fairly new. It's about 55 years old. HCA is about 60 years old coming in. But it really was because a group of about 12 people got around the table who you would think would be normally competitive to each other. And Phil should be telling this story because he came to Nashville really building actually three great healthcare companies. But it's the collaboration that distinguishes us from every major city. Why Nashville itself, compared to any other city, has more impact in touching more people per capita than any city in America today. Much more than New York, San Francisco, Los Angeles, Chicago. It started because a group of 10, 12 people got around a table and said that we're going to collaborate. We may compete building hospitals one-on-one, but we're going to collaborate. We're going to share ideas. We're going to promote each other. We will hire even among ourselves coming in. We'll spin off companies, but we're in this together. No other city does that. And that was unusual, part historical, part just the character of the people at the time. The challenge that we have today, now that we're at the peak, is to keep that going. How do we keep that going when we do have 90% of the healthcare here today is being run by entrepreneurs and innovators and new people coming in? Are they going to be able to capture, or should they maybe, or maybe they shouldn't, but if we want to distinguish ourselves, we need to be able to pass that baton. And the baton is partnership, it's collaboration, it's wanting our neighbors to do equally well. The sort of thing that made us great to get us to the point today, how do we pass that on? I think a lot about that just in healthcare, because Tommy and Phil and others were such a part of that, and now we need to pass that baton on. In the academic world, at Vanderbilt, where I spent most of my career, as well as in the world of the true private sector and the for-profit sector coming in. So Lamar, don't take any of that. But genetic therapy, gene therapy, Washington, D.C., policy, does it matter? How did you get involved with that?
I have a friend in New Orleans who I saw last summer, and he went to the Auctioner Clinic for a clinical trial. He has lymphoma, a blood cancer. They withdrew cells withdrew blood from him, took out the cells, genetically engineered those cells, put them back in, and, quote, cured the cancer. Now, how did that happen? Well, Nashville had something to do with it. Bill Frisk called me and said he had a guy named Doug Oliver from here who was going blind, and the Vanderbilt Eye Institute suggested the only thing they knew was to look on the website for some clinical trial. He found one in Florida. They injected his own cells into his eye. This is called stem cell research, and he could see. He had driven to Washington to tell me about it. Long and short of it was, we passed a bill called the 21st Century Cures Act and had a hard time getting in it language to encourage stem cell research because it was new and people were afraid of the quackery that's involved in it. But it passed. And then in came a new head of the Food and Drug Administration who interpreted the language to allow the kind of genetic engineering of stem cells that cured my New Orleans friend's cancer. So all that happened in a period of about 6 years. And it is a marvelous story, and it suggests how on 2 or 3 levels. 1, you can make a difference even if you're in Nashville about what happens in Washington. 2, things still can happen in Washington, D.C. that are good and create an environment that make things happen. But that's part of the excitement of what you're doing, what you're meeting about, is we've never had a period of time when there was more promise for life-saving cures than today. And it's important that we have the research, the entrepreneurial activity, and the funding to continue it.
Bill?
Yeah, I'd like,
We've got about 10 minutes, is that right? And I know people need to move. We've got 10 minutes, and then I'll close things down here in a little bit. But again, this is totally unrehearsed, so whatever's coming out is coming out. Bill?
yeah, I just want to, that stuff is great, and Nashville has been at the forefront of a lot of the sort of managerial and administrative things in health through a number of different companies and the stuff that's going on that way. But for people in this room, I'd also like to say one of the things that I learned being in public office and so on, and especially as governor with TennCare and the like, is that the real changes in the health status of people really come from some of the soft things, the lifestyle kinds of things, and the access to care early on. And you need to have a balance. I mean, you need to have stem cell therapy and so on, but you also need to have pregnant women seeing an obstetrician, during their pregnancy to address some of the infant mortality issues that we have in Tennessee and the like. And I hope that to the extent to which there are people out here who are involved in healthcare professionally, I hope that sort of trying to move some focus into how you make things work better at that very front end level is the kind of thing that can make an improvement. I mean, we're much healthier today than we were a century ago, but a lot of that is attributable to things like sewage systems. I mean, and a few kinds of drugs, antibiotics, and the like. And finding some ways. I found when I was governor and we were trying to deal with TennCare, which is the Medicaid system, that that was really what was lacking, and that people were sort of going deep into getting ill, where you then have to try to do these heroic kinds of things to address those issues, when there were so many opportunities to catch some of that stuff much more on the front end. I mean, being screened for colon cancer regularly and finding something very early is a lot better than having these extreme treatments available to you when you have a well-developed problem. That really, to me, is the frontier in health right now.
Which is really exciting, and we don't have time for it now, but a program that really is one of the premier programs that many of you are involved with Nashville Health, where we have about 7 nonprofit organizations that include transportation, include housing, include navigation, include food. It was mentioned earlier this morning. brought those organizations together, and they don't have to change exactly what they do at all, but by coordinating what they do with the leadership of Matthew Walker, who's here today, are able to address a fundamental issue of the number one killer in Nashville, Tennessee, and that is heart disease. And the number one killer cause of that is hypertension, high blood pressure. And to basically address that in a data-driven way that is measurable, and by putting those 7 organizations together, convening, collaborating, let's come back to those words again, and then coordinating, which is the key word, we have a measurable impact where right now there's about a 30% reduction in that hypertension, having an impact, which means they'll live longer, healthier lives, more productive lives. And that's what Nashville Health does coming in. One last, pretty cool, pretty neat. Conservation, nature. We touched on it a little bit, as I said, in terms of what Nashville Yards is doing. We have a park system here, a greenway system here. As I said, I'm spending a lot of time today on the soil underneath us and the air that we breathe and the food that we eat. And food is medicine because it impacts our lives in a very direct way. Individuals coming forward, we live happier, longer, more fulfilling lives if we address those things. Right now, I guess Ronald Reagan, what was that commission you were on with him in conservation?
It was the President's Commission on Americans Outdoors.
Okay, Ronald Reagan, a lot of people in here, even that's a while ago. And then after that, what have you done in conservation overall? I mean, most recently, probably the most significant bill in the last 30 or 40 years, you shepherded through, but just real quickly on that.
Well, the first bill, the thing we learned in the President's Commission on Americans Outdoors was we wanted to create an environment where people could do what Phil and others did locally, like greenways, trusts, and land conservation, which he's been involved in, I've been involved in. What I've tried to do is 2 things. One, personally, is work in East Tennessee to protect a lot of land over there on the entrance to the Great Smoky Mountain National Park, so it would be an attractive viewscape because there was no zoning for it. So I took advantage of conservation easements. Second thing was the Great American Outdoors Act, which was passed by President Trump, and 800 environmental groups from the NRA to Sierra Club. Some said it was an unusual alliance. Some said it was an unholy alliance. But what it did was it took money from drilling for energy, oil, on our public lands and used it to maintain our national parks, to try to cut in half in 5 years a huge maintenance backlog in the 433 national park properties we have. So one is an example of trying to do something personally, locally, the land trust and conservation easements. The second is trying as a public official to solve the problem of the National Mall having trash picked up properly, the Pearl Harbor being a mess because it's not being maintained, the Smokies not having enough people to take care of the bathrooms and the trails, working on those 2 levels. And a lot of that working with Bill Frisk because he's chairman, as you know, of the Global Nature Conservancy and involved in a number of really interesting activities.
The 130,000 acres today are in what's called a land trust. The land trust phenomenon, we take it for granted today, and their easements and land trust today are used. Nature Conservancy used to be the biggest in it because it's been in for 40 years, but really kind of an elementary way until Phil Bredesen came along. The Land Trust of Tennessee did not exist. He and a woman by the name of Jenny Nelson got together. I have no idea because we've not talked about it, but all of a sudden said, we need to start this thing called a land trust. What's the history of that? 130,000 acres today would be developed in some way, but now are preserved through the private sector. But where did the land trust come from? Go ahead and tell the history of it.
Yeah, I mentioned early on, I came from a small rural community. I grew up in upstate New York in a town of 1,100 people. So a connection with the land sort of came naturally. I mean, that's what I did in the afternoon after school, was go fishing or go out walking in the woods and those kinds of things. And it was something I always wanted to do and to bring to it. And both as mayor and as governor, we did a number of things to try and preserve land. One of the things that has struck me as Nashville started really growing in the late 90s was that a lot of, particularly around Nashville, a lot of the family farms and stuff, what used to be a family farm turned into a housing development for a bunch of, new houses and so on. And I discovered the existence of things called land trusts and studied it and said that's something I think we really should do. It was a nascent idea for about a year until Jeannie Nelson, I think you mentioned, who had been the general counsel at the EPA in the Clinton administration, came back to town. She was an attorney and called me up and said, "I'm looking for a job. You got any ideas?" And I said, "I've got an idea," and put her together. And she's the person who really made it all work. But it's been incredibly successful. Has preserved a lot of land that I think we're going to really value in the future. The typical person, we came to her would be a family that lived on a farm for a long time, and they said, "Look, we're getting older. I know what my kids are going to do. They're going to sell this off to a developer as soon as we're gone. I want to find some way to preserve it." And the Land Trust was an excellent vehicle to do it. And say it's 130-odd thousand acres now and growing every year.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. Again, an idea, it didn't come to you serendipitously, but to be able to reach out, start it, plant that seed. And as the mayor said, he basically said, all this stuff that we're doing, just going through the budget this morning, I'm not going to be around to say any of that. But to get the idea, to get the mechanics, to put the vision out there and put the apparatus, from both of the stories or both of the individuals, these stories that we hear, to me, they're really inspiring, because it means that we plant these seeds, which are tough and hard and overcoming and anxiety provoking, but if we persist with that in a collaborative way, unique to many ways to Nashville, great things can happen. I know we're getting close, and we're actually over time, but my closing remarks are going to be 3 minutes afterwards. But for both of you, what else have we kind of missed? We just touched the high points. Since we didn't rehearse anything, we didn't know what we're going to talk about. Any final comments? And then probably, is there any advice, that you might throw out to me and to the others, either one of you? What do we miss? Anything else you want to add?
I don't think you've missed anything. I guess all I would want to say to a room full of people like this is the good things that have happened in Nashville and Tennessee, and you can see it around the country. There are things that government may have done something to help get things jump-started a little bit, but in the end, they depend on people who are out there in the world running their businesses and running their nonprofits and so on to bring things forward. That's always been one of the great strengths of Nashville. I see around this room what I think of a little bit as the next generation of those kind of people. So I guess I just want to say to you all, look, I wish you all well in your careers. I hope you're very successful and you can take your family on vacations and have a nice house and all that. But there's also a room full of people who have, been lucky. You live in this country at this time. You've done fine in the gene lottery when you were born. And I'm sure you've stood on shoulders along the way. And I hope you'll find time in your life as things go on to do some things, to find ways to benefit our community our larger community as a whole. Because it really does take, I think, a continuation of people willing to step out and do that to continue the kind of progress that we've made here in Tennessee.
Yeah, well said. Thank you. Lamar, what council advice, what do we miss?
Well, two quick ones. One is, don't wait on Washington, D.C. to solve the transportation problem. Do it yourself. In the 80s, we did that, and in order to attract the auto suppliers, they wanted a good highway system, so we built what the truckers said by 91 was the best in the country. But We did it ourselves, doubled the gas tax. Nobody lost their legislative seat over it because they saw the benefit of it. That's one. Number two, listening to the program today and thinking back over time, of the things that you can do to help people, I think the navigating your way through the healthcare system, navigating your way through the education system, helping people find out where to park, where do you find a child care that you can afford, suggesting a carpool where that would be appropriate. All of those things are a lot easier to do than to build a 4-lane highway to Murfreesboro or out west to get people to Nashville quicker. And I told Bill Frist this morning as I was listening to the discussion from the restaurant fellow who was sitting here, one of our friends in West Tennessee who had a scholarship program for anybody who needed help going to college changed over a period of 25 years and began to spend more of their money on helping those students navigate their way to college because there were lots of scholarships. And so they'd attach some teacher with them in the 8th grade and just stick with them all the way through, saying, here's what you do, here's what you do, here's what you don't do, here's where you go, here's where the scholarship's available, here's how you take a course. So I think if you're looking for something that you could do now, that you could probably afford to do on a manageable scale, it would be to help people navigate their way through the various challenges they have in living in a big, bustling city like this.
Governor Alexander, Governor Bredesen, thank you, for your decades of service. I keep calculating, is it 240 years that we represent, or 230? I don't know what we represent coming in. And really sharing your perspective in a way you can't get to this audience in any other way, because you can't read this sort of stuff, and you can't get it on X, and you can't get it on LinkedIn and Facebook and the like, which to me is the importance of being able to discuss in civil ways. Again, you use these words with a dialogue that is nonpartisan, that really is about lifting people up as individuals. And you've reminded me, and I think reminded all of us, that Nashville is not where it is by accident. And that's not where we are today, but probably even more importantly, as we look to the future, where we're on this great ride coming through, it's not going to be by accident wherever we end up. It's going to take active intervention, impact as individuals, and collective impact. And to all of you, I think that is really these next chapters of Nashville. Our vibrancy and energy is going to be written by people in the room, just like this, in the classrooms and in your companies and your clinics and in your neighborhoods. On behalf of Nashville Health, really thank both of you for the great work that you've done in the past. And if everybody will join me in thanking both Governor Alexander and Governor Bredesen for being with us today, taking time. And when I called them, both of them, and said, I'll be there. Thank you both very, very much for your contribution. Let me take sort of 3 minutes. Am I closing today? The coming in. So 4 minutes coming in. The Nashville Health Mission, I think I've said enough about, and you can talk to Gretchen. Where's Gretchen? Gretchen over there. Raise your hand. Hi, Gretchen, because a lot of people may not have met Gretchen. No, higher than that. Good, yeah. And then Mark Yancey. I want to give both of you a round of applause because of the organization, the focus, and the delivery is really up to you two coming in. So I really want to thank you for that. This whole idea of cross-sector collaboration and energy. It's been really interesting where we started today with the first panel, and Mark and Mayor O'Connell and Joe with the Southwest Value Partners, and Stephanie Coleman of the Nashville Chamber, and Troy White, of course, of the Metro Housing Authority, really setting the stage with the opening of focusing I think, Mark, as you framed it very well, of the people from getting up in the morning who are coming in over the course of the day until they get home and what we can do. And then with our second panel, focusing on the workforce shift, the centering Nashville's core industries there with the Red Pebbles hospitality discussion and by Howard and Wright, your focus on the employee and mental health sticks out, and of course Esther White of the great facility that we're in. This third panel, we just came up with the title sort of a week ago, and it was called Layering of Foundations for Future Prosperity. And I said layering foundation when it hit me. To call it that, I think that's really what we're doing. We're sort of setting these layers one on top of another, and we have a responsibility to do that with both Phil and Lamar here. I do want to thank Mayor O'Connell for his leadership and support all 3 years for this particular conference, which is a curated sort of conference. He has been here. He's been here the night before. He doesn't come in and like a lot of political figures and say hello and give some remarks and leave. He was the first one at the reception last night that we had for some of the panelists, and the last one to leave, and the first one here this morning. And it's not for me, and it's not for anybody except he really cares about this community. So for his leadership and support. I do want to thank all the panelists for their contributions. Raj, we've already thanked you a couple of times, and Morgan Stanley Private Wealth Management, the originator of this in our third year. So Raj, thank you very much as well. Kerry Mack, we haven't really talked very much about, but Kerry's in the back there, and that's a little bit his style. He is responsible for, he and his team, I'm going to say that, and their investors behind them. But Kerry Mack has been in a big part of this community for the last 6 years. But he's come in, and he came here for a reason. And this property that we're on now, in this building, in this region, we talked a little bit about it before, is also a vision which will take Nashville to the next stage. And we're living that in real time. So, Kerry, thank you for your leadership. Nashville Yards and Union Station for hosting us want to thank you. With that wraps it up for today. There is no call to action other than hopefully using this as inspiration to act. To have discussions, the conversations, the collective conversations that we have here are what give inspiration to others. So as we leave here today, let's think of the 2 or 3 things that we picked up that we can apply to make Nashville not only a stronger city, but a city that can deliver more for everybody from an equity standpoint. And not just the people who are out front and people doing all the high profile things, but the people who really make it click. Who really make it, and those are the workers that we talked about earlier today. With that, thank you very, very much. Enjoy coffee, but thank you. Again, thank you both.